My friend always says, "Oops, I left my wallet at home," whenever we go out, expecting me to foot the bill. It bothers me, but my husband had an idea. So I invited her out, pretending I forgot to buy something. We left the place, and now we're trying out our plan. I hope it works. My name's Addison, and I'm 34 years old. I work part-time while my husband Johnny brings in a good income. Our little family, including our 4-year-old son Cliff, lives comfortably. We recently upgraded from an apartment to a house after saving up some money. That's when I met Susanna, a fellow mom in the neighborhood. She's raising her husband's stepchild, which I found intriguing. Eager to befriend her, I soon realized that Susanna had quite the personality. Despite not knowing her well, we welcomed her into our lives. Today, after my son's gym class, I decided to join in, hoping to integrate into the community. It went well, and I made friends with other local moms who invited me for lunch. We grabbed sandwiches and coffee at a nearby cafe when suddenly Susanna appeared out of nowhere. "Addison, what a coincidence! Are you here for a tea party?" she exclaimed loudly, joining our table without hesitation. We exchanged uncertain glances, but couldn't turn her away, so we ended up having lunch with Susanna. As we were finishing up lunch, we started discussing splitting the bill. Then Susanna chimed in, "Since I just happened to be here, I don't need to pay, right?" We exchanged glances, knowing exactly what was happening. Susanna's habit of dodging payment was rearing its head again. Plus, I didn't order anything, so it wouldn't make sense for me to pay, she argued. We sighed at her reasoning. She always found excuses to avoid paying her share. "But Susanna, you did have something to eat, and you ordered coffee," Addison pointed out. "Can you cover for me this time?" "I didn't plan on joining you guys today and didn't bring any money," Susanna replied. We thought she shouldn't have joined us if that was the case, but no one voiced it aloud. I hesitated, but Susanna insisted stubbornly, "I'll pay you back later." "Come on, Addison. We're neighbors. Let's be good neighbors." "So what? What does that have to do with anything?" I wanted to argue, but Susanna started getting upset, refusing to budge, not wanting to make a scene. I reluctantly agreed to her promise and ended up paying for both of us. I received sympathetic looks from those around us, feeling uncomfortable. It was just another example of Susanna's behavior since I moved here. The following day, I found myself at Susanna's doorstep, ready to collect the money she owed me from the previous day. I decided to visit her in person to prevent any excuses about not having her wallet. When I asked for the money, Susanna's expression turned sour. "Seriously, you came all this way just for $10, Addison? That's surprisingly petty of you," she retorted, clearly reluctant to part with the cash. I had anticipated this reaction, knowing Susanna's track record of not repaying me on numerous occasions before. "You've said that before, but you never followed through. You currently owe me over $100. "Enough is enough," I stated firmly, feeling a hint of frustration. Susanna's frown deepened, and she glared at me like a stubborn child. However, I was determined not to back down. Today, Susanna's behavior was quite troublesome. Whether it was hitching a ride to the station when I was heading to work or conveniently forgetting her wallet during shopping trips, her antics seemed endless. Confronting her about it only resulted in childish sulking, with her trying to shift the blame onto me by mentioning Johnny's income and implying I was overly frugal. It was beyond frustrating. If only she could act like a normal friend instead of this. On the day of our shopping trip, Susanna hopped into the car ahead of us, quipping, "Did you forget anything, like your wallet?" I responded curtly, "You should check too," before urging Johnny to start the car. With Cliff safely with my parents, we made our way to the wholesale store, where we found it jam-packed with shoppers. Despite the chaos, I kept our plan firmly in mind. However, we wouldn't have needed the plan if Susanna simply paid her own way. "Wow, look at all this food! They have such a variety," Susanna exclaimed, enthusiastically piling her cart with bags. "Try to keep your items separate," I suggested, but she waved it off, saying we could sort it out later. Despite my warning, my cart soon overflowed with items. I regretted grabbing a cart in the first place. only intending to pick up a few things. It seemed she had no intention of paying for herself, oblivious to our silent frustrations as she continued browsing without checking prices. As we approached the checkout, Susanna's familiar habits resurfaced. Something seems off. Johnny and I exchanged concerned glances. Susanna fumbled through her purse, looking expectantly at us as if waiting for a prompt. When we remained silent, she couldn't hold back any longer and loudly declared, "Oops, I left my wallet at home." Johnny and I exchanged a knowing look, deciding it was time to put our plan into motion. "Oh, I forgot to grab something," Johnny chimed in as we stood in line. I went along with Johnny's plan, nodding in agreement. Susanna, who had been rummaging through her purse, turned to us. "Could you go get it?" she asked. "But what if you can't find it?" I responded, "I know where it is." "Susanna, can you watch the cart while we go back?" I asked, pushing the cart towards her. Susanna instinctively took hold of it. "Huh?" she questioned. "We'll be quick. You sure you'll be okay? Remember, I don't have my wallet," I reminded her. Susanna reluctantly agreed to wait in line while we went to fetch the forgotten item. Johnny and I exchanged a subtle smile, making sure Susanna didn't notice. We then discreetly hid behind shelves and people, keeping a close watch on her. It seemed our plan was unfolding as expected. How long would she wait? With the cart full of items, she couldn't easily abandon them when it was her turn. Suppressing a mischievous chuckle, we remembered how Susanna always relied on my wallet. There were instances when she would make excuses to leave early if I refused to pay. Recalling this, Johnny suggested we turn the tables on her. However, we had agreed that if Susanna made any attempt to pay, we would let it slide this time. But true to form, the moment she reached the checkout, she announced she'd left her wallet behind, seemingly banking on us to foot the bill. It was a predictable move, especially considering her lingering resentment over the last lunch money. Sensing that we weren't returning, Susanna began to look around nervously, staying in line, perhaps contemplating her next move if we did come back. As the line advanced, Johnny and I decided to proceed with the next step of our plan. "Sorry, Susanna, but my mom just called with an urgent matter. You know she's looking after the kids and can't leave the house. So we need to head back home," I informed Susanna over the phone. Susanna's voice betrayed her shock and panic. Wait. What about paying? I forgot my wallet too." "Please hurry back and pay before you leave. Nowadays you can pay with your phone, right? Figure something out. And most of the shopping is yours anyway. If you don't want to pay for a few items, just remove them from the cart. It should be quick since we only picked up 2 or 3 things." Susanna's voice grew increasingly irritated. "I don't have any means to pay. Come back now, or at least leave Johnny here," Johnny interjected, taking my phone with an exasperated tone. "I need to help with the heavy lifting." "Sorry, but you'll have to take a cab back. It's urgent. Or maybe get your husband Phil to pick you up." Susanna was left speechless. We knew she was wary of Phil, as we had heard from other local mom friends about her previous encounters where Phil had sharply scolded her. Despite this, she hadn't learned her lesson and continued her schemes behind Phil's back. That's the situation. If you're unsure how to use your phone to pay, ask the staff. They should be able to assist you. "As that register accepts mobile payments," I explained. Susanna clenched her teeth. "Did you set me up?" "Of course not. Isn't it normal to pay for your own things? Why would I set you up?" I responded calmly. Susanna fell silent, visibly frustrated. We ended the call with her and drove off, imagining Susanna causing a scene at the register, sharing a laugh. The following day, Susanna showed up at my doorstep, clearly still upset about what happened the day before. After enduring several rounds of persistent doorbell ringing, I reluctantly answered. There she stood, her face flushed with anger. "It was awful to leave me stranded like that. I demand compensation," she declared, her tone leaving me skeptical. As she launched into a tirade about the events of the previous day, claiming she had panicked and insisting I owed her double the amount, I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at her demand. "Did you even pay for our items?" she questioned angrily, seemingly oblivious to the absurdity of her own words. "Why would I pay for your shopping?" I responded incredulously, causing Susanna's fury to intensify. "You only covered your own purchases. Why the sudden anger?" I feigned innocence, but Susanna's frustration reached a boiling point. Being left behind was deeply upsetting. It caused me emotional distress. "You should reimburse me for the shopping, the taxi fare, and the inconvenience. After all, you invited me to join you," she insisted, twisting the story to suit her narrative, frowning at her unreasonable demands, especially her attempt to shift blame onto us by portraying herself as an innocent victim. I couldn't help but feel absurd for even entertaining this conversation. Susanna's audacity left me astounded. Unfazed by my reaction, Susanna issued a threat. "If you refuse to pay, I'll spread rumors about you to the neighbors. Think about the consequences for your fancy house. Pay up if you want to avoid that." Confronted with Susanna's unreasonable ultimatum, I realized it was time to reassess our relationship. Just then, a familiar voice broke the tension. At the sound of it, Susanna's face drained of color, and she swiftly turned around. There stood Johnny and Phil, engaged in conversation as they strolled together. "What's going on?" Phil inquired, sensing the tension in the air. "Oh, it's about yesterday," Johnny began, shooting Susanna a meaningful glance. When I mentioned that, he trailed off, leaving Phil curious. Johnny proceeded to recount the events of their trip to the wholesale store with Susanna and how they had to leave abruptly due to an unforeseen circumstance. "Unfortunately, we didn't manage to buy anything in the end," Johnny concluded, sharing a chuckle with Phil. "That's too bad," Phil remarked with a sympathetic smile, unaware of the tension that had transpired. Turning to Susanna, Phil questioned her. "What's your side of the story?" Suddenly stripped of her previous assertiveness, Susanna stumbled over her words, attempting to formulate a response. Sensing her discomfort, I decided to fill Phil in on Susanna's demands from earlier, noting how deeply hurt she had seemed. "I'm genuinely sorry, but asking for compensation and shopping money seems a bit excessive," I expressed, causing Susanna's face to pale. "What do you mean?" Susanna protested, her voice tinged with desperation. "That's not how it is." "But wasn't that the purpose of your visit today? Or was there another reason?" Phil interjected, his tone curious yet perceptive. Caught off guard by Phil's directness, Susanna lapsed into an uneasy silence, her frustration palpable. Phil, sensing that something wasn't adding up, frowned in suspicion. Noticing Susanna's pleading gaze, she turned to me for support, but I remained silent. "Next time, we won't leave you behind. Let's go shopping together again, all right?" I suggested with a faint smile, attempting to diffuse the tension. Okay, Susanna replied hastily, her face drained of color as she hurriedly made her exit. Later, Phil confronted Susanna once more. This wasn't the first time such an incident had occurred, and his frustration was entirely justified. He had personally looked into Susanna's actions after receiving multiple complaints from other local moms, which only fueled his anger. Confronting Susanna about her exploitation of others, he discovered her misuse of household funds on luxury items, which had led to discussions of divorce. Desperate to salvage their marriage, Susanna pleaded with Phil, but he felt betrayed and ultimately decided to kick her out for the sake of their child. Eventually, they went through with the divorce proceedings, with Susanna returning to her family's home to assist with farming. With the troublesome influence of Susanna gone, the neighborhood regained its peace. Nevertheless, we maintained our friendship with Phil and continued to offer our support whenever needed.
The sunlight faded into a soft glow as the day's warmth lingered in our living room, a prelude to what I thought would be a joyous evening. Daniel had just stepped out to the garden with Alex, leaving me to catch a moment of solitude. But solitude was the last thing I'd find today. Jenna, Alex's fiancée, lingered behind, her presence like a shadow that chilled the air. I turned to follow Daniel and Alex, but Jenna's voice, icy and sharp, cut through the silence. "Marianne, you might want to sit down for this." Confused, I faced her, noticing the lack of warmth in her eyes. "Is everything okay, Jenna?" She smiled, but it was devoid of any kindness. "Oh, it's perfect. Just thought to let you know you won't be needing to worry about what to wear to the wedding." I blinked, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "You're not invited, Marianne." Her words were blunt, like a slap. "You see, you're not really Alex's mother. It would be embarrassing to have you there." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "Embarrassing? Jenna, I've been Alex's stepmother for nearly 2 decades. Her laugh was hollow. "Stepmother, right? But not his real mother, just a reminder of his father's past. We wouldn't want to complicate things with your presence." I staggered back, her words wounding deeper than any physical blow. "Jenna, Save it, Marianne. We've made our decision. This is for the best." With that, she turned, leaving me standing there, grappling with a mix of shock, hurt, and disbelief. Daniel's laughter floated in from the garden, a stark contrast to the tension inside. I stood there feeling a profound sense of isolation, as if the family I thought I had was nothing more than a mirage. Gathering my composure, I followed Jenna outside, the weight of her words anchoring me to the spot. Daniel and Alex were deep in conversation, their laughter a balm to the sting of rejection I felt. "Everything okay, Marianne?" Daniel asked, noting my silence. I forced a smile, not wanting to shatter the moment. "Yes, just a lot on my mind." Jenna joined Alex's side, her earlier cruelty masked by a veneer of affection. I watched them, a family tableau I was no longer part of. The evening wore on, but the joy had evaporated, leaving a chill that no amount of laughter could dispel. Jenna's words echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of my place, or lack thereof, in this family. As they left, Jenna's parting smile was a dagger, her final words a clear message. I was an outsider, unwelcome in the life I had helped to build. That night, as Daniel slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The hurt and humiliation churned within me, a storm that promised no easy resolution. Jenna had drawn a line, one that I couldn't cross, even if I wanted to. But as the night deepened, a resolve took root within me. Jenna may have thought she'd won, but I wasn't ready to accept defeat, not yet. There was a part of me, quiet but unyielding, that whispered of retribution, a voice that said this wasn't the end but a beginning. The battle lines were drawn, and I, Marianne, once thought of as just a stepmother, was ready to fight for my place in the family. Jenna's disdain had opened a door to a path I never intended to walk, but now there was no turning back. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to envision a future where the wrongs were righted. Jenna had underestimated me, and that was her first mistake. I vowed it would be her last. The morning light streamed through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the room, a stark contrast to the chill in my heart. As Daniel prepared for work, the normalcy of our routine felt like a farce. The revelation from the night before played on a loop in my mind, but I kept my turmoil hidden beneath a practiced smile. My journey with Daniel and Alex began on a canvas of uncertainty, painted with cautious strokes as we navigated the complexities of forming a new family. Daniel, with his gentle eyes and a heart bruised by betrayal, had won me over, not just with his love, but with his unwavering dedication to his son, Alex. Alex was just 8 when I entered their lives, old enough to understand the change, but too young to accept it without reservations. My love for him was immediate, yet I approached with the patience of an artist, knowing that some bonds take time to form. "I'm heading out, Marianne. Sure you're okay?" Daniel's voice pulled me back from my reverie. "Yes, just lost in thought." "Have a good day," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm within. After Daniel left, the silence of the house enveloped me. The walls, once filled with the laughter and warmth of a family, now seemed to echo with Jenna's harsh words. It was in this solitude that I sought refuge in my art studio, where canvases and paintbrushes awaited my touch. Art had always been my sanctuary, a place where my thoughts and emotions could dance freely across the canvas. Today, it offered not just escape, but reflection. Each stroke became a means of processing the pain, the rejection, and the determination to reclaim my place in Alex's life. As I painted, I thought about the first time I met Alex. He had regarded me with a mix of curiosity and apprehension, his young mind trying to place me in the fragmented picture of his family. I remembered our first genuine moment of connection, over a shared love of art. It was through painting that Alex and I had slowly bridged the gap between us, a series of moments that had felt like victories in the silent battles of acceptance. But Jenna's words had cast a shadow over those memories, suggesting that no matter what I did, I would always be on the outside looking in. The thought was a bitter pill, leaving a lingering aftertaste of resentment and sorrow. The hours slipped by, my emotions spilling onto the canvas in a tumult of color and chaos. It was a reflection of my inner turmoil, a visual representation of the battle I was preparing to fight. As the day waned, I cleaned my brushes, my resolve hardening. Jenna had underestimated the bond I shared with Alex and Daniel. She saw me as a threat, an obstacle to be removed, but she didn't understand the depth of our connection. Dinner that evening was a quiet affair, Daniel sensing my mood but not pressing. The unspoken tension hung between us like a thick fog, our conversations skirting around the edges of the truth. Afterward, I found myself wandering to Alex's old room, now a guest room seldom used. Memories cluttered the space like the scattered toys and books of his childhood. It was here, among these echoes of the past, that my resolve crystallized. Jenna had ignited a fire within me, one that burned with the need for justice and recognition. I wouldn't let her cruelty define my place in this family or dictate the terms of my relationship with Alex. As I stood in the quiet of Alex's room, a plan began to form, a way to expose Jenna's true nature and protect the family I loved. It was a risky path, fraught with potential heartache, but the stakes were too high to back down. I closed the door behind me, the decision made. It was time to fight back, to reclaim the narrative Jenna sought to control. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready. The next move was mine, and I intended to make it count. As dawn broke, the house lay in a heavy silence, a prelude to the storm that was brewing. Today was the day I decided to confront Alex about Jenna's behavior and the disparaging housekeeper comment. My heart raced with a mixture of dread and determination. The thought of facing my stepson, whom I had raised with love and care, over such a painful issue was daunting but necessary. Daniel and I had agreed to speak with Alex together. Unity was our strength, and in this matter, we stood undivided. Daniel's support was my anchor, his calm demeanor a counterbalance to the tempest within me. "Are you sure about this?" Daniel asked, concern etching his features as we sat at the kitchen table, waiting for Alex to arrive. "Yes," I replied, my voice firmer than I felt. "We need clarity. We can't let Jenna drive a wedge through our family." When Alex walked in, the tension was palpable. His usual easy demeanor was replaced by a cautious wariness. He sensed the seriousness of the situation, his gaze flickering between Daniel and me. "Alex, we need to talk about Jenna's comments the other day," Daniel began, his tone measured but firm. Alex stiffened, his defenses rising. "What about them?" "Her saying Marianne isn't welcome at the wedding, and calling her a housekeeper. It's hurtful and unacceptable," Daniel continued, the hurt clear in his voice. Alex's expression hardened. "Jenna has her reasons. She believes family should be at the wedding, and Marianne isn't blood." I caught my breath, the sting of his words sharper than I anticipated. "Alex, I may not be your biological mother, but I've loved and cared for you as my own. Does that mean nothing?" He avoided my gaze, a sign of his inner conflict. "It's not about that. Jenna's just traditional." "Traditional?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my tone. "Or is it her way of asserting control, of excluding me from our family?" Alex shifted uncomfortably, a crack in his facade appearing. "It's complicated. Jenna has strong opinions about family dynamics." "Strong opinions shouldn't justify cruelty or exclusion," Daniel interjected, his disappointment evident. "We're supposed to be a family, Alex. That includes Marianne." The conversation spiraled, with Alex defending Jenna's actions and us trying to make him see reason. But beneath his arguments, I sensed a deeper unease. Jenna's influence was strong, but it wasn't absolute. There were moments, fleeting and fragile, where Alex seemed to waver, his conviction faltering. As the confrontation reached its peak, with voices raised and emotions raw, a painful realization dawned on me. This wasn't just about Jenna's disdain or Alex's acceptance of it. It was a test of our family's resilience. Could our bonds withstand the strain, or would Jenna's malice tear us apart? In the end, Alex left, the chasm between us wider than ever. Daniel and I sat in the aftermath, the weight of the encounter heavy on our hearts. We had to try, Daniel said, reaching for my hand. For our family. I nodded, tears brimming in my eyes. I know, but it feels like we're losing him. Daniel pulled me into his arms, offering comfort in the silence. We won't give up on Alex. We'll find a way through this. As I leaned into Daniel's embrace, a mix of sorrow and resolve settled within me. Jenna had drawn the battle lines, but the war was far from over. I would fight for Alex, for our family, even if it meant facing my own heartache head-on. The confrontation had laid bare the fractures within our family, but it had also steeled my resolve. Jenna's manipulations had ignited a fire within me, a determination to protect my family at all costs. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges, but I was ready to stand my ground, to mend what had been broken, and to reclaim the son I had lost to Jenna's influence. The days that followed the confrontation with Alex were marked by a heavy silence in our home. The air was thick with unsaid words, the tension like a tightrope stretched to its limit. Daniel and I moved through our routines with a semblance of normalcy, but the undercurrent of worry was palpable. Alex hadn't reached out since our argument, and the distance felt like miles instead of the few blocks that separated our homes. I spent my days in my studio, the blank canvases mocking me with their emptiness. Where I once found solace in my art, I now found a void. The colors seemed less vibrant, the brushes heavier in my hand. My thoughts were consumed by Alex and Jenna, their rejection like a constant shadow darkening my creativity. One afternoon, as I stared at a half-finished painting, the phone rang, shattering the silence. My heart leapt, a part of me hoping it was Alex, calling to bridge the gap between us. But it was Daniel, his voice tight with strain. "Marianne, can you come to my office? We need to talk. It's about Alex." The urgency in his voice sent a chill down my spine. I agreed, the sense of foreboding growing with each step I took towards Daniel's office. When I arrived, Daniel was waiting, his expression grave. He ushered me inside, closing the door behind us with a sense of finality. "It's Jenna," he began, his voice heavy. "She's taken things too far." My heart sank. "What happened?" Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's been spreading rumors about you in our community, claiming you're trying to sabotage Alex's future for your own gain. The accusation was like a physical blow, leaving me breathless. But that's absurd. Why would she do this?" "Control," Daniel replied, his eyes dark with anger. "She's trying to isolate Alex to make sure he's completely under her influence, and she's using you as the scapegoat." The realization was a bitter pill to swallow. Jenna wasn't just content with excluding me from their wedding. She wanted to erase me from Alex's life entirely. "What are we going to do?" I asked, the fight in me reigniting. I couldn't let Jenna's manipulations go unchallenged, not when our family was at stake. "We fight back," Daniel said, his determination mirroring my own. "We gather evidence of her lies and expose her for what she is." The plan was risky, fraught with potential fallout, but the alternative, standing by while Jenna tore our family apart, was unthinkable. We agreed to start by reaching out to friends and acquaintances, to counter Jenna's narrative with the truth. As the days passed, we pieced together a clearer picture of Jenna's campaign against me. Her lies were insidious, designed to sow doubt and discord among those who knew us. But with each conversation, with each piece of evidence we gathered, the tide began to turn. People were hesitant at first, but as we shared our side of the story, their skepticism gave way to support. The work was exhausting, emotionally and physically, but it brought Daniel and me closer together. Our evenings were spent reviewing what we had learned, planning our next steps, and most importantly, reaffirming our commitment to each other and our family. Then, just as we were beginning to make progress, a bombshell dropped. Alex reached out asking to meet. It was the first communication we'd had since the confrontation, and my emotions were a whirlwind of hope and apprehension. As we sat across from Alex in our living room, the air thick with unspoken questions, I saw the conflict in his eyes. Jenna's influence was still there, but so was the son I knew and loved. "Mom, Dad," he began, his voice uncertain, "I think we need to talk." The use of mom was a lifeline, a glimmer of the Alex I remembered. As he spoke, outlining his doubts about Jenna and her actions, I felt a door opening, a chance to mend the fractures in our family. The fallout from Jenna's machinations was far from over, but this moment, this conversation, was a beginning. It was a chance to fight for our family, to pull Alex back from the brink, and to stand united against the storm Jenna had unleashed. The path ahead was uncertain, the challenges daunting, but with Alex reaching out, we had hope. And sometimes hope is the strongest weapon in the battle to reclaim what's been lost. The days leading up to Alex and Jenna's wedding were fraught with a tension that seemed to permeate every aspect of our lives. Despite Alex's tentative outreach and his expressed doubts about Jenna, he seemed trapped in the inertia of the wedding plans, unable to break free from Jenna's manipulative grasp. Daniel and I had prepared as best we could for what we knew would be a challenging day. Armed with the truth about Jenna's deceit, we hoped to expose her before it was too late, to save Alex from a mistake that could very well ruin his life. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within our hearts. We received a message from Alex, a simple plea for us to be there, despite Jenna's wishes. It was a sign that the tide might be turning, that Alex was beginning to see through Jenna's facade. We arrived at the venue with a sense of purpose, the evidence of Jenna's lies securely in our possession. The guests were milling about, a buzz of anticipation in the air. Jenna was nowhere to be seen, presumably preparing for her grand entrance. As we mingled among the guests, sharing polite conversation, I could feel the weight of the upcoming confrontation. It wasn't long before whispers began to circulate, fueled by Jenna's allies, painting me as the villain of the piece. But we had allies of our own, those who had seen through Jenna's charade and were willing to stand with us. We had planned to confront Jenna privately to avoid a public spectacle, but fate had other plans. Jenna made her entrance, radiant in her bridal gown, the picture of innocence. But the facade didn't last. As the ceremony was about to begin, Daniel stepped forward, the evidence of Jenna's lies in hand. The room fell into a stunned silence as Daniel spoke, his voice calm but carrying a weight that demanded attention. He exposed Jenna's manipulations, her attempts to drive a wedge between Alex and our family, and her cruel campaign of lies against me. Jenna's reaction was immediate and incendiary. She denied everything, her voice rising in anger as she accused us of trying to ruin her special day. But the evidence was irrefutable, and as the guests murmured among themselves, it was clear that Jenna's deceit was laid bare for all to see. Alex stood frozen, the conflict evident on his face. It was a moment of reckoning, a chance for him to finally see Jenna for who she truly was. The confrontation escalated, voices raised in accusation and defense, until suddenly, Alex spoke. His voice cut through the chaos, a beacon of clarity in the tumult. "Enough!" he exclaimed. "I can't do this. I can't marry someone who would go to such lengths to hurt the people I love." The room fell silent, all eyes on Alex as he turned to face Jenna. "I was blind," he continued. "Blinded by love, or what I thought was love. I see now the pain you've caused, and I can't be a part of that." Jenna's face crumpled, her facade crumbling as she realized her schemes had backfired. The wedding was called off, the guests departing in a whirl of whispered speculations and shock. As the dust settled, Alex approached Daniel and me, his expression one of remorse and relief. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I see now what she was doing. Thank you for not giving up on me." The wedding fiasco was a turning point, a painful but necessary catharsis that cleared the way for healing. Jenna had shown her true colors, and in doing so had freed Alex from her grip. We left the venue together, a family once more united, not by blood, but by the bonds of love and forgiveness. The road ahead would be challenging, but we faced it together, stronger for the trials we had overcome. The wedding fiasco was not just the end of Alex and Jenna's relationship. It was a new beginning for us all, a chance to rebuild and to look forward to a future free from manipulation and deceit. In the aftermath of the wedding that wasn't, our family found itself in a delicate state of rebuilding. Alex, freed from Jenna's manipulative clutches but bearing the weight of his actions, sought redemption in the eyes of those he had wronged. The fallout from Jenna's deception left scars, visible and invisible, that we all worked to heal. Alex's return to the fold was tentative at first. The rift his relationship with Jenna had caused wasn't easily mended, but Daniel and I welcomed him back with open arms, ready to forge a new path together. It was a time of honest conversations, of apologies and acceptance, as we navigated the complexities of our renewed relationships. "I was so lost," Alex admitted one evening, as we sat together in the living room, a space once fraught with tension now filled with tentative hope. I let her words and actions dictate how I saw everyone, even you, Marianne. "I'm so sorry." His apology was heartfelt, and I saw in his eyes the sincerity and the regret. "We all make mistakes, Alex," I responded, my voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside. "What matters is that we learn from them and move forward." Daniel, ever the pillar of strength, added, "We're your family, Alex. Nothing can change that. We stick together through thick and thin." The journey to reconciliation was not without its challenges. There were moments of awkwardness, of revisiting old wounds, but there was also laughter and shared memories, reminders of the bond that had held us together through the years. As Alex worked to rebuild his life, distancing himself from the toxic influences that had led him astray, I found myself at a crossroads. The ordeal with Jenna had drained me, leaving me to question my place in the world, both as an artist and as a stepmother. Yet, it was through this period of reflection that I rediscovered my passion for painting. The studio, once a place of solace, became my sanctuary again, the canvases and paints my companions in healing. My art, which had suffered under the weight of Jenna's machinations, flourished anew, each stroke a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Word of my work began to spread, buoyed by the support of friends and the community that had rallied around us during our time of need. Opportunities arose, unexpected and exhilarating, as galleries and collectors expressed interest in my paintings. Daniel, seeing the light return to my eyes with each new piece I created, encouraged me to pursue my art full-time. "This is your moment, Marianne," he said one day, his eyes brimming with pride. "Your talent, your passion, it deserves to be seen by the world." And so I took a leap of faith. I left my job, dedicating myself to my art, to the stories I wanted to tell through color and form. It was a decision not without its fears and uncertainties, but it was one that felt right, a path forward that was uniquely mine to tread. The months that followed were a whirlwind of creativity and discovery. My paintings, once confined to the walls of our home, found their way into the hearts and homes of others, each piece a fragment of my journey, a celebration of overcoming adversity. Alex, too, found his way, embarking on a new career path that allowed him to use his experiences to help others. His relationship with Daniel and me deepened, the bonds of family strengthened by the trials we had faced together. As I look back on that tumultuous time, I am reminded of the power of forgiveness, of the strength found in unity. Jenna's attempt to tear us apart had, in the end, brought us closer together, a family reborn from the ashes of conflict. Life, like art, is a tapestry of light and shadow, of moments both bitter and sweet. In embracing the full spectrum of our experiences, we find the beauty in resilience, the grace in redemption, and the endless possibilities that await us on new paths. like3 Google usercontent.com AAFTP5/AEFT5GBO5V7 Jericho KML7 Picoles 96C. The journey from the depths of family turmoil to the light of new beginnings was neither swift nor easy, but it was transformative. As I reflect on the path we traversed, I recognize not an ending, but a continuation. A narrative that extends beyond the confines of conflict and resolution into the boundless realm of growth and opportunity. In the months following our reconciliation and my commitment to art, our home became a testament to change. Where once there were echoes of discord, now resided peace and creativity. Daniel, ever my rock, embarked on his own journey of discovery, finding joy in supporting not just my artistic endeavors, but also in fostering a deeper connection with Alex. Alex's evolution was perhaps the most profound. Freed from Jenna's influence, he blossomed, embracing his true self with a vulnerability and strength that was both inspiring and heartwarming. His endeavors to help others, drawing from his own experiences of manipulation and redemption, filled us with pride. The bond between us, tested by fire, emerged stronger, a phoenix reborn. Our story, marked by the scars of betrayal and the beauty of forgiveness, had resonated beyond our immediate circle, touching the lives of those who had witnessed our struggle. The community, once a battleground of rumors and lies, became a network of support and admiration. The success of my art, once a distant dream, became a reality, Exhibitions, commissions, and accolades followed, each achievement a shared victory for our family. The themes of my work, influenced by our journey, spoke of resilience, hope, and the enduring power of love, resonating with an audience far wider than I had ever imagined. As I stood at the opening of my latest exhibition, surrounded by my family and the vibrant expressions of my soul adorning the walls, I was struck by the profound journey of transformation we had undergone. This was not the end of our story, but a new chapter, rich with potential and promise. Daniel, with his unwavering support, and Alex, with his renewed sense of purpose, were by my side, not just as spectators, but as co-creators of this beautiful tapestry we called life. The trials we faced had not only tested, but ultimately affirmed the strength of our bond, teaching us that the essence of family transcends blood and conflict. Looking ahead, the future was a canvas, vast and unmarked, waiting for us to cast our dreams upon it. With brushes in hand and hearts united, we were ready to paint a masterpiece of our own making, filled with the colors of joy, the textures of growth, and the light of love. This chapter of our lives, marked by pain, redemption, and artistic rebirth, was a testament to the indomitable spirit of the human heart. It was a reminder that out of darkness comes light, and from the shadows we can emerge, not diminished, but emboldened to face the dawn of new beginnings. As the evening drew to a close, I realized that our story, with its twists and turns, its lows and highs, was a beacon for anyone navigating the stormy seas of life. It was a narrative of hope, a declaration that no matter how fierce the tempest, the sun awaits to bathe us in its warmth and light. In the end, our journey was not just about overcoming adversity, but about embracing the beauty of the life that lay before us, rich with possibility and enlivened by love. This was not the end, but a beautiful, ongoing emergence from the shadows into the brilliant light of day. I never expected to come home to a mystery. My name is Emily, a 29-year-old sales manager, and I had just returned from a business trip in New York. My husband Daniel was supposed to be on a trip to Chicago. Our quiet suburban home, usually dark and empty during our mutual absences, was strangely alive with light. As I dragged my suitcase up the driveway, our neighbor Sarah approached me. Her expression was a mix of concern and awkwardness. "Emily, I thought you were away. The noise last night. I'm sorry if we disturbed you," she said, biting her lip. Confusion clouded my mind. "I just got back, Sarah. What noise?" Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, I thought you were home. Your lights have been on every night this week. I heard some laughter and music last night. I assumed you guys were throwing a small party or something." I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. Daniel was supposed to be in Chicago, not here having parties. "No, it wasn't us. Daniel's away on business," I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah's face mirrored my confusion. "That's odd. Well, welcome back, Emily." With that, she retreated, leaving me with a growing sense of unease. Inside, the house felt different. It was too neat. The air held a faint scent of perfume, not mine. I moved through the rooms, my heart racing. Then I saw them. A pair of red high heels by the bed, shoes I had never seen before. They sat there, silently screaming a truth I wasn't ready to face. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Dialing my in-laws, I put on my best cheerful voice. "Hi, Linda. Hi, George. I have a great idea. How about a surprise dinner for Daniel? He's supposed to come back tomorrow. Let's pretend I'm still away and give him a surprise welcome." Their enthusiastic agreement did little to ease the dread coiling in my gut. As I ended the call, I knew one thing for sure. Something was terribly wrong, and I was about to uncover it. The stage was set, and the players were about to assemble. The truth awaited, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. The evening was cool and quiet as Linda and George, my in-laws, pulled into our driveway. Their faces were bright with excitement for the surprise. I greeted them with a forced smile, masking the turmoil inside me. "Emily, darling, this is such a fun idea. Daniel will be so surprised," Linda chirped as she hugged me. I nodded, leading them inside. "He thinks I'm still out of town. Let's hide in the living room and wait for him to arrive." The tension was palpable as we settled in. The unfamiliar pair of high heels I had found earlier glared at me from the corner, a stark reminder of the betrayal lurking in my own home. An hour passed, and then we heard the front door open. My heart pounded in my chest as we heard footsteps approaching. The living room door swung open, and there stood Daniel, frozen in shock. "Emily? Mom? Dad? What's going on?" His voice faltered, eyes darting nervously. "Surprise!" Linda exclaimed, but her smile faded as she took in Daniel's guilty expression. "Daniel, why are you so surprised to see your wife in her own house? And why do we hear rumors that you've been here all week?" George's voice was stern, his usual jovial demeanor gone. Daniel's face flushed red. I had to come back early, work stuff. I didn't tell Emily because I wanted to surprise her." I stepped forward, holding up the red high heels. "And who do these belong to, Daniel? Surprising me with a guest." His eyes widened in panic. That's not what it looks like, Emily." Before he could say more, we heard a noise upstairs. Footsteps. Slowly descending. I felt Linda and George's bewildered gaze on me as a young woman appeared at the foot of the stairs. It was Rachel, a former colleague known for her flirtatious behavior and disregard for boundaries. "Daniel, who are all these people?" Rachel asked, her voice dripping with feigned innocence. The room fell silent. Linda's hand flew to her mouth and George's face turned to stone. I looked at Daniel, betrayal etching a deep scar in my heart. "Rachel, meet my parents and my wife, Emily," Daniel stammered, his facade crumbling. Linda's eyes brimmed with tears, and George's voice shook with anger. "You bring a woman into your marital home? This is how you respect your marriage?" The confrontation escalated as accusations and denials flew. Rachel's smug expression only fueled my growing rage. This was the breaking point, the moment my marriage turned to dust. As the night wore on, the truth became painfully clear. My world had been shattered, but from its ruins, a fierce resolve was born. Daniel and Rachel would not get away with this betrayal. The stage for revenge was set, and I was ready to play my part. The morning after the confrontation was heavy with unspoken words. Linda and George had left, their disappointment palpable. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched coffee, my mind racing with cold, hard thoughts of revenge. Daniel emerged from the guest room, his eyes avoiding mine. "Emily, we need to talk," he began hesitantly. I looked up, my voice icy. "There's nothing to talk about. I want a divorce." He flinched as if struck. "Please, Emily, it's not what you think. I was lonely, you were always away, and Rachel, it just happened." I slammed my hand on the table, startling him. "Just happened? You betrayed our marriage, Daniel, and in our home. There's no excuse for that." Daniel's attempts at explanation were feeble, filled with cliches and blame-shifting. It was clear he was more concerned about being caught than the actual infidelity. I stood up, my decision firm. "I'll be contacting a lawyer today. I want you out of this house." "But Emily, this house, it's ours," he protested weakly. "No, Daniel, it's mine. You forget, your credit was a mess. This house is in my name only. And remember, you've never paid a dime towards the mortgage." His face paled, realization dawning. I didn't care. The man I loved had been a facade, and I was done playing the forgiving wife. As I walked away to make the call, I could feel his eyes on my back, filled with desperation and regret. But it was too late. My heart had turned to stone. The lawyer was sympathetic and efficient. "You have a strong case, Emily, especially considering the infidelity and the financial aspects." I nodded, feeling a sense of empowerment. "I want to sue for emotional distress as well. He's not going to walk away from this unscathed." "Understood," the lawyer replied. "We'll make sure he pays for what he's done." Word of Daniel's infidelity spread like wildfire, tainting his reputation. Colleagues and friends looked at him differently now. He had become a pariah, an outcast in the community we once shared. As I lay in bed that night, the silence of the house was a stark contrast to the chaos in my heart. The path of revenge was lonely, but necessary. Daniel had to learn that his actions had consequences. This was just the beginning. The weeks following the revelation were a blur of legal consultations and cold, sleepless nights. My resolve for revenge never wavered, even as Daniel's pleas for forgiveness became more desperate and frequent. One afternoon, as I was sifting through divorce papers, the doorbell rang. Standing outside was Rachel, her face a mask of arrogance and defiance. "Can we talk, Emily?" she asked, trying to push past me into the house. I blocked her path, my voice steady but cold. "There's nothing to discuss. You're not welcome here." Rachel's eyes flashed with anger. "Daniel loves me. You can't just throw him out like this. It's not fair." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Fair? You talk about fairness after sneaking around with my husband, you're as delusional as he is. Her face contorted with fury. You're ruining his life, and for what? Revenge? You're pathetic. I stepped closer, my voice laced with venom. No, Rachel, what's pathetic is a woman who preys on a married man. You both deserve what's coming to you. She scoffed and turned away, but not before I saw the uncertainty flicker in her eyes. They knew their affair wasn't just a harmless fling anymore. It had consequences, and they were just starting to feel them. The news of the lawsuit and divorce spread like wildfire. Daniel's reputation at work crumbled. Whispers followed him everywhere, and his professional relationships soured. Rachel, too, found herself isolated, her manipulative charm no longer effective. The day Daniel was let go from his job, he came to me, a broken man. Emily, please, I've lost everything, my job, my reputation, isn't that enough? I looked at him, feeling nothing but disdain. You should have thought about that before you betrayed me. This is the bed you've made, Daniel. Now lie in it. As I closed the door on his pleading face, a sense of satisfaction washed over me. This was the revenge I had sought, to see him lose everything, just as I had lost my trust and love for him. But even as I savored the moment, a hollow feeling lingered in my heart. Revenge had its price, and I was beginning to understand the cost. The divorce proceedings were a cold, methodical process. Each session in the lawyer's office was a reminder of the irrevocable damage Daniel had inflicted on our marriage. He seemed to shrink with each meeting, a shadow of the confident man I had married. One day, as the autumn leaves began to turn, I received a call from Linda. Her voice, usually warm and cheerful, was heavy with disappointment. Emily, we saw Daniel yesterday. He's not doing well. I paused, unsure how to feel. Linda, he made his choices. I know, dear, but he's our son. He's lost his job, his friends. Now he's talking about leaving town. It's just heartbreaking to see him like this. I sighed, a part of me softening. I understand, Linda, but he brought this on himself. I'm moving on with my life. The call ended on a somber note. I couldn't deny a twinge of pity for Daniel, but it was drowned out by the echo of his betrayal. A week later, Daniel's voice came through my phone, small and defeated. Emily, the company let me go. They said it was because of the lawsuit and the scandal. I've got nothing left. His words should have brought me satisfaction, but all I felt was emptiness. You should have thought about the consequences, Daniel. I hope you find a way to rebuild your life, but it won't be with me. Hanging up, I realized the revenge I had sought was a hollow victory. Yes, Daniel was paying for his actions, but the cost was higher than I had anticipated. It wasn't just his life unraveling, it was a part of mine too. As the days passed, the house felt more like a shell, a reminder of a life that once was. My victories in court, the compensations, the apologies, they all felt meaningless. The finality of the divorce papers was a stark, unyielding end to a chapter I once cherished. I began to understand that revenge, no matter how justified, doesn't always bring the closure one seeks. It was a lesson learned in the hardest way, through the pain of a broken heart and a broken marriage. Time, they say, heals all wounds. It was a slow, painful process, but gradually the raw edges of betrayal and anger began to fade. I immersed myself in work and reconnected with old friends, building a life that was entirely my own. 2 years had passed since the divorce when I met Alex. He was different from anyone I'd ever known, kind, understanding, and with a warmth that seemed to light up the darkest corners of my past. With him, I rediscovered what it felt like to trust and love again. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset, Alex took my hand. Emily, I know your past has been painful, but I want to be part of your future. Will you marry me? The proposal was simple, yet it filled me with a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. Yes, Alex, I would love that. We married in a small, intimate ceremony. It was a new beginning, a chance to leave the shadows of the past behind. A year into our marriage, I found out I was pregnant. The news brought a joy so profound, it eclipsed the lingering bitterness of my previous marriage. When our son Ethan was born, holding him in my arms felt like holding a piece of the future, bright and full of possibilities. It was during one of these peaceful days that I received an unexpected call. It was Daniel. His voice was hesitant, a far cry from the confident man he once was. Emily, I heard you've moved on, that you're happy. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. His apology, late and inadequate, didn't stir the old anger I expected. Instead, I found myself feeling indifferent. "Thank you, Daniel. I've moved on. I wish you well." As I hung up, I realized that I had truly turned a page. The hurt and betrayal that once consumed me had lost their grip. In their place was a life filled with love, a family I adored, and a future that was mine to shape. 3 years after my divorce from Daniel, life had settled into a peaceful rhythm. My days were filled with the laughter of my son and the quiet, steadfast love of Alex. The shadows of the past had dimmed, replaced by the bright promise of the present. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I pushed Ethan's stroller through the park, I spotted a familiar figure on a distant bench. It was Daniel. He looked older, warier, a stark contrast to the man who once shared my life. Our eyes met, and in a moment of unexpected courage, I approached him. "Emily?" he said softly, his voice tinged with a mix of surprise and remorse. "Daniel," I replied, feeling a strange sense of detachment. "How have you been?" He glanced at Ethan, then back at me. "I've been surviving. Seeing you now with your son, you look happy." "I am," I said, not without a sense of pride. "Life has moved on, Daniel. I've found happiness again." He nodded, looking down at his hands. "I never did. After everything that happened, after losing you, my job, I realized the cost of my mistakes, but it was too late." His words were heavy with regret, but they no longer had the power to hurt me. "We all make choices, Daniel, and we live with them. I hope you find some peace." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. "I'm glad you're happy, Emily. You deserved better than what I gave you. I'm truly sorry." As I left the park that day, with Ethan babbling happily in his stroller, I felt a sense of closure. The final chapter of a painful part of my life was concluding, and the future stretched out before me, filled with hope and light. In the end, the greatest revenge was not in seeing Daniel suffer, but in building a life of joy and love beyond him. A life where the scars of the past were just faint lines, testaments to my strength and resilience. I walked home that day with a light heart, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The journey had been long and fraught with pain, but it had led me to a place of peace and contentment, and for that I was profoundly grateful. In the quaint Midwestern town where I, Elena Martinez, lived, life had a rhythm as predictable as the ticking of an old clock. But ever since my mother passed away, that rhythm had been disrupted by the uninvited intrusions of 2 people, my mother-in-law, Helen, and my sister-in-law, Rachel. They had a knack for appearing at my doorstep just when I craved solitude the most. "You know, Elena, it's quite rude to keep us waiting at the door," Helen would say, with a tone dripping with passive aggression. I could see Rachel smirking beside her, her eyes scanning my living room like a hawk. "Sorry, I wasn't expecting anyone," I'd reply, my voice strained with forced politeness. Their visits had become a dreaded routine. Each time they arrived, they expected to be entertained and catered to as if they were royalty, and I, a mere servant in my own house. "We're just here to keep you company, dear. You must be so lonely without your children," Helen would chide, settling herself comfortably on my couch. Rachel would follow suit, lounging as if she owned the place, and then would come the most irksome part. "Elena, why don't you order us some steaks? We can't have our visit without a proper meal," Rachel would suggest, her voice sweet yet commanding. "But it's almost 4 p.m., I would protest weakly. Helen would wave her hand dismissively. "Nonsense, dear. It's never too late for a good meal. And make sure it's from that expensive place downtown. We deserve a treat, don't we, Rachel?" As I begrudgingly placed the order, watching the numbers on the bill climb, I felt a mix of anger and helplessness. These steak dinners were bleeding me dry, yet I couldn't muster the courage to stand up to them. It was a financial strain I could ill afford, but Helen and Rachel seemed oblivious to my plight. What made it worse was my husband Michael's indifference. Whenever I tried to discuss the matter with him, his responses were dismissive at best. "They're family, Elena. It's just a few steaks. Don't make a big deal out of it," Michael would say, avoiding my gaze. "But it's every day, Michael. And it's not just about the money. They're taking advantage of our hospitality," I would argue, my frustration evident. "Elena, they mean well. You're overreacting," he would conclude, effectively shutting down any further discussion. This pattern continued for 2 long years. 2 years of unannounced visits, expensive meals, and a growing sense of resentment. It felt like I was trapped in a cycle with no escape. But little did I know the real storm was yet to come, a storm that would change everything. The routine continued, each day blending into the next with Helen and Rachel's unrelenting visits. However, one evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across my living room, Michael came home with a look on his face that spelled trouble. "Elena, we need to talk," he said, his voice unusually stern. Sensing the gravity in his tone, I braced myself. "What is it, Michael?" He took a deep breath and, without any preamble, dropped the bombshell. "My parents and Rachel's family are moving in with us next week. You need to clear out your room." I felt the room spin around me. "What? Michael, this is our home? You can't just decide that without discussing it with me." Michael's expression was cold, unyielding. "It's decided, Elena. They need a place to stay, and it's high time we do our part for the family." "But where am I supposed to go?" My voice cracked, a mix of disbelief and hurt swelling within me. "You figure it out. Maybe you can stay with a friend," he said dismissively. This was my family home, passed down to me from my parents. To be told I had no place in it was more than just an insult. It was a betrayal of the worst kind. I stood there, numb, as Michael continued. "You're always complaining about Helen and Rachel. This way you won't have to deal with them anymore." His words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. I realized then that the man standing before me was not the Michael I had married. He had become a stranger, one who valued his family over his wife. As Michael walked away, leaving me standing alone in the dimly lit room, a fire ignited within me. A fire of anger, yes, but more than that, a determination to stand up for myself. "I'll clear out the house," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "But not in the way you expect." Michael paused, turning back with a smirk. "I thought you'd put up more of a fight. But if you're being sensible for once, that's good." He didn't understand. He couldn't see the resolve that had taken hold in me. For years I had been the dutiful wife, bending over backward to accommodate his and his family's whims. But not anymore. The next morning, as Michael left for his business trip, I took my first step towards freedom. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had found the night before. My voice was calm, my instructions clear. "Yes, I'd like to schedule a pickup for all my furniture and appliances," I said, a sense of empowerment growing with each word. "And I need it done before the end of this week." As I hung up the phone, a sense of exhilaration washed over me. It was the beginning of my revenge, a plan meticulously crafted to turn the tables on those who had wronged me. Michael thought he had won, but he was gravely mistaken. The house would be cleared out, yes, but it would be empty for him and his precious family. I was taking back control, one step at a time. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I coordinated with movers, arranged for the sale of furniture, and secretly packed my personal belongings. Every item that held sentimental value to me was carefully boxed up, ready to be transported to my new temporary refuge, my son's apartment in the city. As the movers worked, the house began to echo with the emptiness of its soon-to-be barren rooms. Each piece of furniture that left the house felt like shedding a layer of the life I had built here, but with it, a weight lifted off my shoulders. The day before Michael's return, the house stood empty, a hollow shell of its former warmth. I took one last look around, memories flashing through my mind, of laughter, of tears, of moments cherished and now left behind. But this was no time for nostalgia. It was time for retribution. I left a note on the barren kitchen counter, its words succinct. "Michael, as per your request, I have cleared out the house. Good luck with your new living arrangements. Elena." With that, I turned my back on the life I had known and headed to the city, a mix of apprehension and excitement for what lay ahead. Upon arriving at my son's apartment, his welcome was warm but tinged with concern. "Mom, are you sure about this?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "I've never been more certain," I replied, my resolve unwavering. That evening, as anticipated, my phone rang. It was Michael, his voice a cocktail of confusion and rage. "Elena, what the hell have you done? The house is empty." "Yes, Michael, you said to clear out my room. I took it to mean the entire house," I responded coolly. "That's not what I meant, and you know it. Where are you? What about all our stuff?" "I've taken what's mine. The rest is for you to figure out," I said, a sense of satisfaction creeping into my voice. You can't do this to me, to us. Michael's voice cracked with desperation. Funny, I thought the same when you decided to kick me out of my own house, I retorted. The line went silent for a moment before Michael hung up. I knew this was just the beginning, but it was a start to taking back my life and dignity. Sitting in the quiet of my son's apartment, I realized this was more than just revenge. It was a statement that I was no longer the Elena who would be walked over and disregarded. This was a new chapter, one where I would be the author of my own story. The next morning, the gray light of dawn filtered through the curtains of my son's apartment, bringing with it a sense of anticipation. My phone rang, the caller ID flashing Michael's name. I answered, bracing myself for the onslaught. Elena, you've got to come back. This is madness. Michael's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. I'm not coming back, Michael. You made it clear I wasn't wanted, I replied, my voice steady. You can't just sell all our things and leave. What about us? What about our marriage? The desperation in his voice was palpable. Us. Our marriage, I scoffed. That ended when you chose your family over me in my own home. There was silence on the other end. I knew I had hit a nerve. It was then that I revealed the full extent of my actions. Also, Michael, I've started the process of selling the house. As you so eloquently put it, it doesn't matter who it originally belonged to. You can't do that, Elena. It's my home, too. His voice was rising in panic now. Not anymore, Michael. And since you're so concerned about family, I'm sure Helen and Rachel can help you find a new place. The line went dead. I knew this wasn't the end of it, but for the first time in years, I felt in control of my destiny. Later that day, Rachel called, her voice dripping with venom. You backstabbing witch, how could you do this to us? Where are we supposed to go? The same place you expected me to go, I replied coldly. You and Helen were so eager to take over my home. I'm sure you can figure something out. You'll pay for this, Elena. You think you're so clever, but you're nothing without us. Rachel hissed before hanging up. Their threats and pleas continued over the next few days, but I remained resolute. I had spent too many years being manipulated and undermined. It was time they faced the consequences of their actions. As I started my new job in the city, a sense of liberation enveloped me. I was no longer the doormat, Elena, but a woman who stood up for herself. The drama and chaos of my past life felt like a distant memory as I embraced this new chapter. In the end, my revenge wasn't just about emptying a house or selling off property. It was about reclaiming my self-worth and dignity. Michael, Helen, and Rachel had underestimated me for the last time. Now, they were left to deal with the mess they had created, while I finally moved forward, free from their toxic grasp. Weeks turned into months, and my life in the city started to take on a rhythm of its own. The calls from Michael, Helen, and Rachel became less frequent, their voices losing the battle against my newfound resolve. I had started to build a life for myself, one that was free from their manipulation and control. One afternoon, as I sat in my modest but cozy apartment, my lawyer called with news. Elena, the court has finalized your divorce, and the house, it's legally yours. Michael's claim was denied. A wave of relief washed over me. This was more than just a legal victory. It was vindication. It was proof that I had been right to stand up for myself, to fight back against the injustice that had been thrust upon me. But how? That house is all I have. Michael's incredulous voice echoed through the phone later that day. You made your choices, Michael. You chose your family over your wife. Now you live with those choices, I said, the finality in my voice mirroring the closure I felt inside. But Elena, where will I go? I have nothing, he pleaded. That's not my concern anymore, Michael. You should have thought of that before, I replied before hanging up. In the weeks that followed, rumors reached me through friends still living in my hometown. Michael, Helen, and Rachel had been forced to move into a rundown apartment on the outskirts of town. Their once comfortable lives had become a daily struggle, a stark contrast to the luxury they had once taken for granted. I heard about Helen and Rachel's constant bickering, their relationship strained under the weight of their new reality. Michael, it seemed, had taken to gambling, hoping to win back some of their lost fortune, but only sinking deeper into despair. These stories, once a source of pain, now seemed distant, almost foreign. I had moved on, building a life that was mine and mine alone. My job in the city was fulfilling, and my evenings were spent exploring my newfound freedom. One day, as I walked through the bustling city streets, I bumped into Anthony, a friend from my hometown who had also moved to the city. We shared our stories, finding solace in our mutual experiences. "Elena, it's incredible how much you've changed. You're like a completely different person," Anthony said, admiration in his eyes. "I had to change, Anthony. It was the only way to save myself," I replied, a smile playing on my lips. As we talked, I realized that Anthony and I had more in common than our past. We both had been through trials that had shaped us, made us stronger. And in that strength, we found a connection. Life had taken me on a journey I never expected. I had faced my fears, stood up to those who had wronged me, and come out stronger on the other side. My story was one of transformation, of a woman who reclaimed her life from the ashes of her past. And as I looked ahead, I knew that whatever the future held, I was ready for it. With my head held high and my spirit unbroken, I stepped forward into my new life, a life where I was the author of my own destiny. "Just look at that!" I exclaimed, staring at the electricity bill in disbelief. $327.38, nearly double what we usually pay. Outrageous. I'd always prided myself on budgeting carefully, tracking every expense down to the last penny. My passion was collecting limited edition desserts, and I indulged whenever I could, so for the bill to suddenly skyrocket made no sense. "That can't be right," Neil replied, peering over my shoulder with a frown. My supportive husband was always on my side. "We haven't changed any habits recently." Well, something caused this. I grabbed my laptop to scrutinize the household usage data. No obvious spikes. Perplexed, I gazed out the window and stopped short. There, peeking out from beneath the decorative bushes separating our house from Neil's parents' new home next door, was a wire, thin and black, snaking towards their shed. Surely just a cable line? But we had underground connections. A horrible suspicion crossed my mind. No, it wasn't possible. Was it? Just last month, Neil's parents Vera and Hank had moved into the newly constructed house on the lot beside ours. Neil and I had welcomed them warmly despite Vera's tendency to overstep with unsolicited parenting advice. I'd written it off as her quirky way of showing warmth. But now... "Neil, look," I gestured out the window. As he spotted the wire, his eyebrows shot up. Without a word, we stepped outside, circling the bushes to trace the wire's path. It ran directly from our external outlet to Vera and Hank's shed. Our mouths fell open as we exchanged stunned looks. "No way," Neil uttered in disbelief. "They can't be." Anger and hurt welled up inside me. They'd seemed so friendly, so supportive. Had it all been an act? Just then, the back door of their house opened. Vera breezed out carrying gardening shears, calling over her shoulder, "Be back in a minute!" Spotting us, she changed course, bearing down with her usual overbright smile, the one I now realized never reached her eyes. "Well, hi there, neighbors," she trilled. "Taking in this beautiful sunny day?" I crossed my arms. No more playing nice while she played us for fools. "We were just investigating something strange," I said bluntly, stepping aside so she could see the wire. "Would you happen to know anything about this?" Vera's gaze bounced from me to the wire and back again. For a brief moment, her smile faltered, but then she waved a hand and laughed. "Oh, that old thing. The builders must have left it behind." Even to me, the excuse sounded feeble. She trailed off under my stern gaze. Neil stepped forward, fists clenching. "Have you been stealing our electricity, using this wire to tap into our supply?" His voice shook with anger and betrayal. Vera reeled back. "What? How dare you?" She glared venomously. "I was just trying to cut costs. Our retirement budget is stretched thin. Surely you understand." At that, the floodgates opened. I lost my composure, shouting at her audacity. Neil joined me, demanding answers about the ethics of stealing from family. She alternated between righteous indignation and half-hearted apologies. The confrontation left me reeling and even more hurt than before. That evening, after Vera had retreated in a huff, Neil held me as I cried bitter tears over the shattered remains of what I'd thought was a supportive, loving family relationship. How could they betray us like this, and what else might they be hiding? I couldn't even bear to tally up how much they could have stolen over the past month. Hundreds of dollars we'd worked hard for, callously snatched away without a thought for how it would impact us. Gazing at our electricity bill later that night, I set my jaw. The Vera and Hank I thought I knew would never do something so underhanded, which meant I'd never actually known them at all. The realization stung, but it sparked a steely determination within me. No more playing nice while they took advantage and sabotaged our carefully balanced budget. If this was their opening salvo, then the battle lines had just been drawn. I would get to the bottom of this and make them pay. I awoke the next morning still simmering from yesterday's confrontation. As I gulped my morning coffee, I kept replaying Vera's audacious lies and excuses. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. A knock at the front door made me jump. Speak of the devil. I peered out to see Vera standing there clutching a plate of cookies, an overly bright smile pasted on. Just seeing her made my blood boil even hotter. I swung open the door. "What do you want?" I asked bluntly. Vera blinked, clearly taken aback by my lack of pleasantries. Good. Her smile dimmed a fraction. "Oh, Lena, about yesterday." She extended the plate. I baked these by way of apology. I stared at the offering in disgust. Did she really think cookies would make everything better? When I made no move to take them, she pressed on earnestly. "It was all just a silly misunderstanding. I never meant any harm, truly." Misunderstanding? My fists clenched by my sides. This woman's audacity knew no bounds. "You mean when you deliberately tapped into our electricity supply to avoid paying your fair share?" I bit out. Vera frowned, dropping the act. "Oh, don't be so self-righteous. Our budget is extremely tight. We're just cutting costs where we can." "By stealing from us? From your own son? How could you? We trusted you." My raised voice brought Neil from the other room. I felt him come stand supportively beside me. Vera flushed. "Now see here, you two are blowing this out of proportion. Can't we talk civilly about this over some cookies?" She offered the plate again with a conciliatory smile. But I'd had enough. Taking the plate from her, I upended it onto the doormat. Cookies scattered everywhere as Vera gasped. "There! Take back your lies and excuses." I glared venomously. "We will not be placated so easily." As I slammed the door in her astonished face, I felt a small spark of vicious satisfaction. There, let her see I wasn't messing around. Over the next few days, Vera's intrusions multiplied, stoking my simmering resentment. She popped by nearly every day with unwanted gifts and advice about everything from our spending habits to refrigerator organization. Each visit grated on me more. The final straw came when I spotted her letting herself in our back gate one morning. Marching outside, I confronted her sneaking around near our fuse box. She claimed she was just checking the wiring, but I knew she was scoping out ways to restore her illegal supply. Enraged, I changed the locks and gate code. When Neil suggested leaving a key with his parents just in case of emergency, I shot that down fast. Give them an inch, they'd take 10 miles. Clearly, they refused to respect boundaries. Well, if politeness wouldn't get through, then it was time to play hardball. Over dinner with Neil that night, I revealed my plan. We need evidence before going to the electric company or police. I'm going to set up a surveillance camera covering that fuse box. That should capture any further attempts. Neil frowned nervously. "Isn't that a bit aggressive? They're still my parents." I fixed him with an adamant stare. "They committed theft without batting an eye. I warned you they'd take advantage of any wiggle room we give them. It's time to take a stand." Neil's shoulders slumped. "You're right. I just wish it hadn't come to this." I knew he was still clinging to hope of reconciling with them. But sentimentality would get us nowhere against such conniving adversaries. The very next morning, the camera captured Vera skulking by our fuse box, clearly probing for a way to reconnect. Gotcha! I added the video to the growing evidence file. When she caught me installing a motion-activated floodlight days later, Vera went pale. I maintained steely eye contact until she hurried away without a word. Good. Let her sweat a little. She was quickly learning her tricks wouldn't work on me. Soon we'd have enough documentation to bring down the full consequences on her deceitful head. She'd rue the day she ever thought she could walk all over me without retaliation. By the time I was through, karma would bite back hard for her lies and manipulation. This was only the opening salvo. The real fireworks were still to come. Over the next week, I became obsessed with monitoring Vera's activity and tracking our electricity usage. I knew something didn't add up there and was determined to get to the bottom of things. Sure enough, One morning, the motion detector notifications showed Vera skulking around our yard in the early hours. The floodlight switched on, illuminating her heading towards the back gate with wire cutters in hand. Smirking, I swung open the back door. "Forget the locks, Vera? Or were you hoping to override my security system?" She jolted, hiding the cutters behind her back. "Lena, I was just, checking the wiring connections back here." I stepped forward, glaring daggers. "Save it. I've got you on camera trying to break in and poach our supply again." Vera straightened defiantly. "You can't prove anything. I'm well within my rights to check wiring on my property. The only thing you have a right to do is stay the hell away from our house," I shouted. "Give me those." I lunged for the cutters, but she dodged me. We struggled briefly before she wrenched away, lips curled in a sneer. "Have it your way, then. But this isn't over. I promise you that." She turned and stormed off. Seething, I relocked the gate and rearmed the security system. How far would that deranged woman go? Over the next few days, Vera kept her distance. But my anger simmered, erupting one evening when our latest electricity bill arrived. I tore open the envelope and scanned the total, $412.60. "What?" I exploded, making Neil jump. "Even after locking them out, it keeps getting higher." Neil's forehead creased with worry. "Are you sure the motion lights aren't causing it?" I shook my head firmly. "I've accounted for every variable. Something fishy is still going on here." Suddenly the doorbell rang. We exchanged wary glances before Neil opened it to reveal Hank standing there, shuffling nervously. "We need to talk," he mumbled, not quite meeting our eyes. "It's about the wiring issues." I crossed my arms, steeling myself. "Go on, then." Hank cleared his throat. "Vera wants to bury the hatchet, and we'd like a key made just in case you two are ever unavailable and an emergency repair is needed." My temper flared again. "Give them access after everything? Not a chance." I jabbed a finger at Hank's chest. "You mean give you free rein to keep tapping our power?" Hank backed away, protesting. Neil quickly intervened before things escalated further. After Hank retreated in a huff, Neil gave me a serious look. "We can't keep fighting them like this. What if we sit down civilly and try to sort this out?" I bit my lip, considering. As much as I hated to admit it, maybe we did need an open conversation before things spiraled irrevocably out of control. So a few days later, Vera and Hank sat stiffly on our couch while Neil mediated. I stated my case bluntly. The unchecked electricity drainage had to stop, or we'd take legal action. Vera alternated between superficial apologies and rambling excuses, while Hank stared at the floor. Eventually, Neil negotiated a tenuous truce. We'd refrain from formal complaints if the electrical issues ceased immediately. After they left, Neil gave me a pleading look. "Let's give them one last chance before escalating this further." Though it grated on me, I reluctantly agreed. One final opportunity to make things right, before my vengeance hammer fell with full righteous fury. In the following days, I still patrolled for suspicious activity, but when our next bill showed only a marginal increase, I allowed my guard to lower slightly. Maybe they were actually holding up their end for once. Either way, the surveillance would continue. I wouldn't be fooled again by their facade. Soon I'd know if this truce was genuine, or merely the quiet before their next brazen attack. I awoke one morning to find Neil already up, pacing worriedly. Wordlessly, he handed me the latest electricity bill, $492.79. I saw red. It was even higher than the first shocking amount. Despite all my precautions, I slammed the paper down. I knew it. They blatantly lied about stopping their deceitful schemes. It's time to bring down the hammer on them. Neil wrung his hands anxiously. "Shouldn't we confirm it's actually them first?" "Oh, it's them all right," I fumed. "Now we're getting the electric company involved to trace this." Whipping out my phone, I called to demand an urgent investigation. The following afternoon, I escorted the technician towards our fuse box, scanning for any sight of Vera and Hank. If they caught wind of this inspection, there'd be hell to pay. Luckily, their house appeared silent. The tech removed the box cover, examining the interior wiring with a practiced eye. As he shifted to inspect the ground wire connections, he paused. "Well, that shouldn't be there." I hurried over to see him tugging on a cable that had been very deliberately wired into our supply line. My fists clenched with rage. "Gotcha!" I knew they couldn't resist resuming their illegal connections. Their audacity knew no bounds. The technician shook his head. You've got a tap wire spliced directly into your power. Draining it right off, too. He traced the cable behind our bushes. Looks like that house next door. I threw my hands up furiously. I knew it. Those lying snakes swore they'd stop stealing from us. Wait until I expose their thievery to the whole neighborhood. I whirled to storm next door and confront them, but Neil grabbed my shoulders gently. We have solid evidence now. Let's make a plan first before charging over there. I took a deep breath, wrestling my temper back under control. He was right. As satisfying as a verbal lashing would feel, it would likely only spawn more lies and denial. Better to retain the element of surprise for now. The technician cleared his throat awkwardly. If you'd like to file charges, I can provide documentation on the unauthorized wiring setup here. I gave a sharp nod. Yes, we absolutely want to pursue this legally. Justice would be served soon enough. That night after dinner, Neil and I strategized our next moves. In addition to pressing charges, I suggested blasting their thievery across neighborhood Facebook groups. Once everyone knows what duplicitous fraudsters they are, they'll be social outcasts. Avoiding jail is the least of what they deserve. I slammed my hand on the table for emphasis. Neil bit his lip nervously. I agree they need to face consequences, but public shaming seems extreme. I leaned forward adamantly. After all the warnings and second chances, I will flaunt their shame so widely they'll never show their faces around here again. Neil still looked hesitant about my scorched earth approach, but the die was cast. After tomorrow's confrontation, one way or another, Vera and Hank would regret the day they ever targeted me as an easy victim for their deception. The next evening, I turned off all our outdoor lights and ensured the motion detectors were disabled. Under cover of darkness, the technician arrived to sever and remove Vera and Hank's parasitic connection. Phase 1 of retaliation was complete. At sunrise, after double-checking the cables had been separated, I dialed the police dispatcher with Neil beside me. My hand tremored slightly as I reported the extensive wire fraud next door. But my voice remained steady, fueled by white-hot indignation. I wanted to witness Vera and Hank's reactions firsthand when the police showed up to investigate. But Neil convinced me to lay low to avoid prematurely tipping them off. So we watched discreetly through the window as first one, then 2 squad cars rolled up outside their house. As the officers knocked and presented a search warrant, I hugged myself tight, almost dizzy with vicious satisfaction. Got them. After all the lies and manipulation, their web of deception was unraveling before my eyes. Soon they'd be facing criminal charges, and once word spread about their shady exploits grifting naive neighbors, their remaining reputation would be left in tatters too. I finally exhaled, feeling the knots of tension start to loosen within me. The confrontation would come soon enough, but for now I'd scored a decisive victory against their underhanded scheming. Watching the police continue scouring Vera and Hank's home for illicit connections, I allowed myself a small smug smile. Justice was finally at hand. In the aftermath of the police visit, an uneasy quiet descended on our normally peaceful neighborhood. I kept vigilant watch out the window as whispers spread about Vera and Hank's shady wiring scam. When curious neighbors knocked to probe us for details, I remained tight-lipped. Let the authorities handle things from here. Though it took immense self-restraint not to blast Vera's misdeeds from the rooftops myself, I waited to see how the investigation unfolded. Sure enough, a few days later, Neil spotted a certified letter in their mailbox, addressed from the county clerk's office. Subpoena for evidence, no doubt. The wheels of justice were turning. My smug satisfaction only grew when I peered out the window later to see Vera emerging red-eyed and distressed from a shouting match with Hank. She must be waking up to the severity of the charges they faced with their little larceny scheme unraveling fast. As I watched her hurry tearfully back inside, I couldn't suppress a vicious smirk. Where were her snide excuses and haughty denials now that hard proof had been found? Serves her right. Maybe the threat of jail time would make her reflect on toying with decent, law-abiding folks. The sight stirred conflicting emotions in Neil, though. That night over dinner, his brow remained deeply furrowed. Do you think I should try talking to them?" he suggested tentatively. "Plead for leniency with the DA before an indictment comes down?" My hand clenched furiously around my fork. Lenient. Is that what their deceit and manipulation warranted? When they'd shown no mercy towards our hard-earned money or trust in family bonds? Taking a deep breath to rein in my outrage, I fixed Neil with a stern look. You can't protect them from what's coming. Don't let misplaced guilt sway you from the facts. He looked away, jaw tight. I knew seeing his parents suffer pained him on some level. But the time for sympathy was long past. The next morning brought a new development, a large for sale sign staked outside Vera and Hank's house. Peering out as a startled neighbor walked by, I understood immediately. They were trying to liquidate fast and hightail it out of here before the hammer fell. Well, not if I had anything to say about it. Storming outside in my bathrobe, I waved wildly to stop the passing couple gawking at the sign. Time for some strategic gossip-mongering. A shame about those electrical thieves leaving already, isn't it? I commented conversationally. I would have loved to see them in handcuffs getting dragged off to prison myself. The wife's eyes boggled. Mission accomplished. That juicy tidbit would spread quickly now. Let's see anyone make offers once word got out they were flight risks awaiting criminal charges. I strode back inside with grim satisfaction, already formulating my next moves. Vera and Hank had avoided me long enough. It was time we finally talked openly. Soon Neil and I stood firmly at their front door as I rapped sharply. When Vera answered, surprise flashed across her face before she schooled her features carefully neutral. Lena, Neil, to what do I owe the pleasure? Her polite tone held an unmistakable note of wariness. I folded my arms severely. You know exactly why. We're here to talk things over. Vera eyed me for a long, silent moment before reluctantly backing up in wordless invitation. As we stepped inside and sat on their couch, I inspected Vera closely. She seemed diminished somehow, worn and haggard in a way that had nothing to do with physical age. The gnawing anxiety was clear in her dull eyes and tense posture. Good, let her squirm. I had zero intentions of showing mercy. Not until she fully acknowledged her lies and made proper amends. Settling back with arms still crossed, I pinned her with an icy stare. Well then, let's chat frankly now about recent events, shall we? Her hands twisted together nervously. Yes, Vera. Face the music at last. In the days following Vera and Hank's dramatic arrest, the neighborhood gossip mill churned faster than ever before. Supportive friends stopped by, eager for updates while casting disdain on that awful thieving couple. I remained discreet with details, but made sure everyone knew they'd admitted guilt to us directly. Let Vera's illusions of sympathy for her plight be crushed. Neil busied himself advocating for leniency against my advice. She still deserves imprisonment for the betrayal of family, I argued hotly. Neil just sighed. Harsh sentences won't undo the damage, though. Though it irked me letting Vera off lightly, Neil's pure heart wouldn't wish crushing punishment on anyone. A week later, Neil got an update call from Vera's lawyer. In exchange for testimony on other neighborhood scam incidents, she'd gotten off with probation and heavy court fees. I scowled angrily at the news. A light slap on the wrist. Where was the justice for nearly $1,000 stolen from us over numerous months? Storming outside that afternoon to retrieve the mail, I paused, seeing Hank shuffling forlornly around their for sale sign. His worn complexion and disheveled appearance testified to many sleepless, stressful nights since their crimes had come to light. Good. Let the weight of consequences torment them a while longer. Skirting widely around Hank, I went back inside, feeling sour. Neil tried reassuring me again. She's banned from our property at least, plus the public shaming. Isn't that enough? My temper flared. Hardly. That woman slithered out of any real punishment for her misdeeds. Well, we shall see. I wasn't done with Vera yet. Time for the next phase. Ensuing, she fully paid her karmic debts. Using contacts I had in the county clerk's office, I quietly pursued getting the case evidence released publicly. And I began judiciously leaking additional gossip about Vera's long history of shady dealings. Let the full spotlight expose her deceit for all to revile. Soon enough, muckraking local reporters came sniffing at my prompts. I watched with smug satisfaction as the first scathing exposés skewering shameless schemester Vera hit the presses. As if on cue, my phone pinged with a neighborhood watch alert. Vera had been spotted yelling tearfully at a reporter to leave her alone. Music to my ears. Clearly, the non-stop public harassment was taking its toll. Over dinner I showed Neil the alert triumphantly. Now she's getting a taste of consequences beyond the courthouse. But instead of matching my fierce grin, Neil paled. This seems less like justice and more just cruelty now, he said quietly. She's clearly paid for her crimes already. I smacked my hand down furiously. How can you say that? Mere fines and hand slaps while she sobs about harassment. I won't rest until she fully understands the pain her deceit caused. Neil just gazed at me sorrowfully. Stung, I turned away. Why couldn't he see I was protecting us from further exploitation? The next morning brought a new bombshell. I spotted a local real estate item announcing Vera and Hank's house had sold for a fraction of its value after sitting unpurchased for weeks. Ha! Undoubtedly the non-stop media spotlight had scared away any serious buyers. Sweet justice. Perhaps the financial blow would finally dent Vera's defiant spirit. Sure enough, later that day a moving truck rolled up outside their house. I watched with vicious satisfaction as a weary, broken-looking Vera supervised movers hauling shabby boxes out to the truck unassisted by any friends or family. In her expression of utter defeat, I recognized the bitter taste of karmic retribution at last. She was getting every bit of what she deserved. Soon I'd be fully rid of her deceptions and delusions of grandeur for good. Let her start over penniless and friendless elsewhere. As the moving truck finally pulled away, exhaust fumes momentarily obscuring Vera's face, I lifted my chin in cold triumph. I'd won. In the weeks after Vera and Hank's ignominious exit, the neighborhood gossip mill continued churning. But with the primary culprits gone, intrigue gradually faded. Soon talk turned to more mundane matters, and benign normalcy returned to our quiet corner of suburbia. Neil and I gradually adjusted back to our familiar routines free of toxic drama. With our backyard now a serene vista instead of an anxiety minefield, my guarded hypervigilance eased. I took smug satisfaction seeing new friendly neighbors move into Vera's former house, restoring community spirit. One afternoon while gardening, I made casual small talk with them about selecting new fence plants without the old electrical complications. Goodness, we'd heard rumors the previous residents were problematic, the wife said, eyes round. Something about stealing utilities? How dreadful for you! I smiled blandly, holding off from fueling rumors. Let the Vera debacle fade fully into the past now. That night I sorted through old papers and spotted evidence records from the wire fraud case. I paused, Vera and Hank's embittered faces flashing through my mind. Then I firmly shoved the papers in the shredder. Piece by piece I disposed of the last lingering vestiges of their existence cluttering my orderly world. Soon I could close the book on that chapter for good. With them off, reinventing themselves elsewhere, I finally had closure. Meanwhile, Neil seemed to relax as well, now that his parents were safely out of legal jeopardy and time had passed since the arrest scandals. We settled fully back into familiar routines. After returning from his teaching job one day, Neil wrapped me in a grateful hug. I'm glad we can just focus on us again. No more disputes interfering with enjoying each moment together. I squeezed him back happily, the past year's stresses dissipating further. Harmony was worth far more than any revenge. To celebrate leaving toxicity behind, I indulged in purchasing a long-coveted, rare French dessert I'd bookmarked, symbolic of restoring sweetness to life. The $200 price barely dented savings bolstered from an electricity bill back to normal. One morning, soon after, I walked outside to get the mail and paused, seeing an unfamiliar envelope addressed simply, "To my daughter-in-law." I froze. Vera? How dare she contact me after everything? Hands shaking slightly, I tore the envelope open. Inside, I found a brief note in shaky handwriting. Lena, I owe you the deepest apology for betrayal that cannot be forgiven. I pray you've found peace. I will not contact or return again. Instead of vindication, a surprising emotion lanced through me. Shame. Because this single conciliatory letter conveyed more authentic remorse than all Vera's tearful drama ever had. I tried justifying my retaliation campaign. She'd brought it on herself. But remembering Vera's broken expression as she drove away in defeat, had getting even truly brought me satisfaction either? Had I become the very monster I hated in her? At that moment, Neil walked up behind me. What's wrong, honey? Wordlessly, I handed him the letter. As he read, eyebrows furrowing worriedly, my high moral ground suddenly felt much less secure. Yes, Vera and Hank had acted despicably out of misguided self-interest. But did everyone, even the lowest scoundrel, not deserve redemption someday? Perhaps in banishing Vera so ruthlessly, I had strayed farthest of all from basic human decency. What truly separated my hardball tactics from her manipulations in the end? Weeks later, the matter still pestered my conscience. To clear the air fully, I knew hard conversations remained. One night at dinner, I broke the heavy silence. Do you ever regret how forcefully we handled things with your parents? Neil blinked, hesitating thoughtfully. I just wish communications had stayed more civil on all sides. My face flushed hot with remorse. I shouldn't have kept escalating vengefully. Can you forgive me? I held my breath. Neil smiled gently, taking my hands in his. Of course. Let's leave recrimination buried in the past now where it belongs. The relief of reconciliation washed over me. I still had much self-reflection yet ahead on temperance and compassion. But together Neil and I would find our way towards better understandings. As we embraced lovingly, I let go fully of the last bitter remnants of score-settling resentment I'd clung to so fiercely. What mattered most was choosing each day to see the best, not the worst, in those around me, including myself. The door slammed shut behind me, echoing through the empty hallway. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Ethan's shoes were not the ones greeting me, but a pair I knew all too well. Vera's. Alara, what in the world do you think you're doing, coming home this late? Vera's voice sliced through the silence, sharp and accusing. I found my voice, though it trembled slightly. Vera, I didn't expect you to be here. It's not about me being here. It's about you neglecting your duties as a wife. Where have you been? Her eyes bore into me, seeking to unravel any excuse I might offer. I clutched the book about Miami tighter, feeling the weight of her judgment. This wasn't just about tonight. This was about every silent battle, every unspoken grievance that had built up over months. Ethan told me he wants a divorce, she continued, her words cutting deeper. I can't say I blame him. You're hardly the wife we hoped for. I felt a cold resolve settle over me. This was not just a confrontation. It was a declaration of war. My marriage, my life, was slipping through my fingers, controlled by a woman who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. I had always been the quiet one, the one who avoided conflict. But as Vera's words echoed in my mind, something within me snapped. No more. I wouldn't be the silent, suffering wife anymore. Vera, I work too, you know. I'm not just a housewife waiting for Ethan to come home, I said, my voice steady now. You work? That little office job? You think that's an excuse? You should be here, making this a home, not gallivanting around, she scoffed, her disdain palpable. Her words stung, but I stood my ground. I have every right to live my life, Vera. I'm not just an extension of Ethan. Her lips curled into a sneer. You're a disappointment, Alara. A real wife would put her husband and his family first. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. I won this trip to Miami, Vera. I was planning to give it to my parents, but now... Her eyes lit up with a mix of surprise and greed. Miami? Well, that changes things. Ethan and I could use a holiday. The audacity of her words hit me like a physical blow. It's not yours to take, Vera. I won it. It was for my parents. She stepped closer, her voice dripping with venom. You're part of this family now, Alara. Your things are our things. And if Ethan wants to go to Miami with his mother, who are you to stop him? I felt the anger rising in me, a burning flame fueled by months of her belittling and manipulation. It's my prize, Vera. I decide what happens to it. Her laugh was cold and mocking. We'll see about that, Alara. We'll see. She turned on her heel and left, leaving me standing alone, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and anger. I knew then that this was just the beginning. I had to fight back, not just for myself, but for the life I wanted, a life free from Vera's shadow. As I lay in bed that night, Ethan's snores a dull backdrop, my mind raced. Our marriage, once a hopeful union, now felt like a trap tightening around me with each passing day. The man beside me, once my partner, now seemed more like a stranger, a puppet dancing to his mother's tune. Morning came, and with it the usual routine. Ethan, always the early riser, was already at the breakfast table when I entered the kitchen. His eyes were glued to his phone, a frown creasing his forehead. "Good morning," I said, my voice neutral. He grunted in response, not looking up. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the silence between us heavy. Finally, he spoke, his eyes still on his phone. Mom mentioned you want a trip to Miami. I nodded, bracing myself. Yes, I was planning to give it to my parents. Ethan finally looked up, his expression a mix of annoyance and entitlement. You should have discussed it with me first. Mom really wants to go. I clenched my fist, fighting the urge to lash out. Ethan, it's my prize. I wanted to do something nice for my parents. He shrugged, dismissive. Well, Mom's been feeling down lately, since Dad passed. This trip could really cheer her up. I could feel the anger bubbling inside me. And what about my parents? Don't they deserve a break? Ethan's eyes narrowed. You're being selfish, Alara. Family comes first. Your family, you mean? I shot back, my patience wearing thin. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. You're my wife, Alara. That makes my family your family. The finality in his voice was a clear message. In his eyes, I was an accessory, an addition to his life, not a partner. I was to fall in line, to play the part he and Vera had scripted for me. The rest of the day passed in a blur. At work, I found myself distracted, the image of Ethan's indifferent face haunting me. I felt trapped, caught in a web woven by Vera and tightened by Ethan. That evening, I returned home to find Vera in my kitchen, cooking. The smell of her stew filled the air, a stark reminder of her constant presence in our lives. Alara, there you are. I thought I'd make dinner tonight. You must be tired from work, she said, her voice dripping with false concern. I forced a smile, my stomach churning. That's very thoughtful of you, Vera, she hummed, stirring the pot. Ethan told me about the Miami trip. It's a shame you won't be joining us. The casualness of her words was like a slap in the face. I haven't decided yet, Vera. She turned, her eyes cold. Oh, but you have, dear. Ethan and I will be going. It's settled. The room felt small, suffocating. I wanted to scream, to shout, to reclaim my life from this woman who had insidiously crept into every corner. But I held my tongue, my resolve hardening. Vera and Ethan might think they had won this round, but I was far from defeated. I would find a way to turn the tables, to expose their selfishness and manipulation. As I sat at the dinner table that night, picking at the stew Vera had made, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about a trip to Miami anymore. It was about taking back control, about fighting for my dignity, and I was ready for the battle. The following week was a tumultuous mix of silent dinners and whispered phone calls. Ethan had become increasingly distant, his allegiance clearly with Vera. The trip to Miami, my hard-won prize, now felt like a poisoned chalice. On a particularly dreary Thursday, I received a call from my mother. Her voice, usually so full of life, was tinged with disappointment. Alara, dear, your father and I heard about the Miami trip. It's a shame we won't be going. Guilt gnawed at me. I'm sorry, Mom. I really wanted you both to have it. She sighed. It's all right, darling. We understand. Family must come first, as your husband says. The way she said family stung, a reminder of how Ethan and Vera had twisted the meaning of the word. That evening, as I entered the house, I found Ethan and Vera in the living room, poring over travel brochures. Their excitement was palpable, a stark contrast to the hollow feeling in my chest. Alara, come look. We're planning our Miami trip, Ethan called out, his voice too cheerful. I approached reluctantly, the sight of them together like this sending a wave of nausea through me. Vera looked up, her eyes gleaming. We're thinking of staying at this lovely beachfront hotel. Isn't it wonderful? I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. It looks nice. Ethan glanced at me, then back at the brochure. We should book soon. Don't want to miss out. Vera nodded in agreement, her smile widening. Yes, let's. Alara, would you mind fetching us some tea? The request, so casual yet so commanding, was the last straw. Actually, I need to talk to you both about the trip. Their attention snapped to me, a flicker of wariness crossing Ethan's face. The thing is, I began, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest, the trip to Miami was supposed to be a gift for my parents. I won it, and I should decide how it's used. Ethan's expression hardened. Alara, we've been through this. Mom needs this trip. Vera chimed in, her tone patronizing. Dear, it's just a trip. Your parents will understand. Frustration boiled inside me. No, you don't understand. This was something special for my parents. You can't just take it away. Ethan stood up, his demeanor shifting from cheerful to menacing. You're being selfish and unreasonable, Alara. This is family we're talking about. I am talking about my family. I shot back, my voice rising. Vera tutted, shaking her head. Ethan, see what I mean? She's not family-oriented, not like us. I looked between them, my heart racing. You know what? Take the trip, but this is not over. Turning on my heel, I stormed out of the room, their triumphant smirks burning in my memory. As I headed to our bedroom, a plan began to form in my mind. They wanted to play dirty? Well, two could play at that game. This trip to Miami would be a trip they'd never forget. A trip where karma would come calling, and I would be the one to deliver it. I spent the next few days in a state of cold fury, my mind racing with plans for revenge. Ethan and Vera, ensconced in their bubble of self-righteousness, seemed oblivious to the storm brewing. On Saturday morning, as I sipped my coffee, Ethan slid a brochure across the kitchen table. We've booked the hotel in Miami. It's going to be fantastic. I looked at the glossy pictures of sun-kissed beaches and luxury suites, a bitter taste in my mouth. I'm sure you'll enjoy it, I said flatly. Ethan frowned, picking up on my tone. What's your problem, Alara? You should be happy for us. I stared at him, incredulous. Happy? You're taking a trip meant for my parents, and you want me to be happy? He leaned back, his expression one of exasperation. You're making a big deal out of nothing. It's just a trip. Just a trip? I echoed, my voice rising. It was a gesture for my parents, Ethan, something special for them. And you and your mother just bulldozed over it. Ethan's patience snapped. Enough, Alara. You're acting like a child. You need to start thinking about what's best for this family. The word family echoed in my ears, twisted and corrupted by his and Vera's selfishness. And what about what's best for me? For my family? I countered. Ethan stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You're my wife, Alara. Your place is here with me and my mother. If you can't accept that, maybe we shouldn't be married. His words hung in the air, a threat and a challenge all at once. For a moment I felt a pang of fear, of uncertainty, but then a wave of clarity washed over me. Maybe you're right, Ethan, I said quietly, my decision made. Maybe we shouldn't. His eyes widened, taken aback by my response. What are you saying? I met his gaze, my resolve steeling. I'm saying that this marriage, this life, it's not what I want, not with you and Vera controlling every aspect of it. Ethan's face contorted with anger. You'll regret this, Alara. You think you can just walk away? From me? From this family? I stood, facing him squarely. I'm not walking away, Ethan. I'm taking back my life. He snorted, dismissive. We'll see how long you last without us. I turned away, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. The stage was set, the players in place. It was time for my revenge to unfold. As I packed a small bag, my thoughts were clear and focused. Ethan and Vera had pushed me to the edge, and now they would see just how far I was willing to go. This was no longer just about a trip to Miami. This was about reclaiming my dignity, my independence, and showing them that I was not to be underestimated. I left the house without a backward glance, the door closing behind me with a finality that felt like freedom. I moved back to my parents' house, each step feeling like a weight lifting off my shoulders. My parents, though surprised, supported my decision. In the sanctuary of my old room, I plotted my next move. A few days later, Ethan called. Alara, where are you? We need to talk about the Miami trip. I'm at my parents', I replied, my voice steady. And there's nothing to talk about. You've made your decision. He was silent for a moment. You can't just run away from this. We're married. Not for much longer, I said quietly. I'm filing for divorce, Ethan. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Divorce? You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, I affirmed. Our marriage is over, Ethan. He sputtered in disbelief. You'll regret this. You think you can just leave me and get away with it? I smiled, a sense of empowerment surging through me. I'm not getting away with anything. I'm taking back my life. Ethan's voice turned cold. We'll see about that. And the Miami trip? You're ruining everything. I chuckled softly. Oh, Ethan, you have no idea. Enjoy your trip. The line went dead, and I sat back, a plan forming in my mind. Ethan and Vera thought they had won, but the game had just begun. The next day, I called the airline. I need to make a change to the reservation for the Miami trip. The agent was accommodating. Of course, Miss Alara, what changes would you like to make? I won't be going, I said. The tickets are non-transferable, correct? That's right, the agent confirmed. Good, I said, a smile playing on my lips. Keep it that way. The day of their departure arrived, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of anticipation. Ethan and Vera, unaware of the surprise awaiting them at the airport, were in for a rude awakening. I received a call from Ethan later that day, his voice frantic. "Alara, what the hell did you do?" "They won't let us board. The tickets are void without you." I feigned innocence. "Really? That's strange. I guess you should have read the fine print, Ethan. You did this on purpose," he accused. I shrugged, even though he couldn't see me. "You took something that wasn't yours, Ethan. Actions have consequences." His voice was a mix of anger and desperation. "This isn't over, Alara. You'll pay for this." I hung up, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. This was just the beginning of their downfall. Ethan and Vera had underestimated me, but they were about to learn just how costly that mistake was. As I sat back, a plan unfolding in my mind, I knew one thing for sure. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and I had just started cooking. After thwarting Ethan and Vera's Miami plans, I felt a sense of control returning to my life. But my thirst for justice was far from quenched. The real act of retribution was about to begin. A week passed, and I received a call from Ethan. His tone was a mix of anger and desperation. "Alara, we need to talk. I'm coming over." I agreed, curiosity piqued. When he arrived, he was a shadow of his usual arrogant self. "Alara, I'm in trouble," he began, his eyes avoiding mine. I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of trouble?" He hesitated before confessing. "At work. They've started an investigation. They think I've been embezzling funds." I suppressed a smile. "Embezzling? That's serious, Ethan." He ran a hand through his hair, visibly stressed. "It's not just that. They're questioning my absences, my trips with Mom. They think it's all connected." I leaned back, the pieces falling into place. "Sounds like you've made quite a mess." He looked up, desperation in his eyes. "Alara, I need your help. You have to vouch for me. Tell them I was with you." I laughed, the sound bitter. "Why would I do that, Ethan, after everything?" He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Please, Alara, I'm begging you. If I lose this job, I'm ruined." I stared at him, the man who had once been my world, now reduced to a groveling mess. "You should have thought about that before, Ethan. You made your bed. Now lie in it." As he left, his shoulders slumped. I knew the wheels of karma were turning. The following day, news of Ethan's dismissal and his embezzlement spread. Vera, once so proud and haughty, became the subject of whispers and judgmental glances in the neighborhood. Their fall from grace was swift and merciless. Ethan tried to reach out again, but I was done. My lawyer handled the divorce proceedings, ensuring I was well protected and compensated. As for Ethan, he was left to face the consequences of his actions alone. I visited my parents, sharing the news. "It's over," I told them. "The divorce is final." My mother hugged me, tears in her eyes. "You're strong, Alara. Stronger than you know." I nodded, a sense of peace settling over me. I had to be, Mom, for myself. In the end, Ethan and Vera reaped what they had sown. Their deceit and selfishness had been their undoing. As for me, I was free from their toxic grip, ready to start anew. The scars of the past would always be there, but they were a reminder of the battles I had faced and won. I was no longer the meek, compliant wife. I was Alara, a woman who had stood up for herself and emerged stronger. The day after my divorce was finalized marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. The shackles of my oppressive marriage were finally broken, and I could breathe again. Sitting in my parents' garden, I reflected on the journey that had led me here. The pain, the betrayal, and ultimately, the triumph over those who sought to control me. My mother joined me with 2 cups of tea. "What will you do now, Alara?" she asked gently. I took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through me. "I'm going to live, Mom, for myself this time." She smiled, a look of pride in her eyes. "You've grown so much, darling." Our conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. My father answered it, his voice rising in surprise. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" I stood, my heart pounding. Ethan stood at the door, a shadow of his former self. "Alara, I need to talk to you." I walked over, my resolve firm. "There's nothing left to say, Ethan." He looked desperate, his eyes pleading. "Please, Alara, I've lost everything. My job, my reputation. Even Mom won't talk to me. I need your help." I shook my head, incredulous. "You expect me to help you? After everything you've done?" He reached out, but I stepped back. "I'm sorry, Alara, I was wrong. Please give me another chance." Then I looked at him, seeing the man I once loved now broken and humbled. "It's too late, Ethan. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." He slumped, defeated. I understand. I'm sorry, Alara. Truly. As he walked away, I felt a sense of closure. Ethan's downfall was his own doing. He had underestimated me and paid the price. Turning back to my parents, I smiled. I think it's time for a new adventure. Weeks later, I found myself on a plane to Miami, the trip I had won all those months ago. This time, it was on my terms. My parents sat beside me, their excitement contagious. As the plane soared above the clouds, I looked out the window, a sense of freedom washing over me. I had faced my battles and emerged victorious. Now it was time to enjoy the peace that came after the storm. Miami awaited, a symbol of my newfound independence and strength. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, to live a life filled with joy on my terms. Ethan and Vera were part of my past, a chapter closed and left behind. Ahead lay endless possibilities, a future where I was the author of my own story, and I was determined to make it a beautiful one. The sound of Alex's voice sliced through the clatter of dishes like a sharp knife. "Alara, bring me some tea now." I paused, my hands submerged in soapy water. "Hold on, I'm doing the dishes." "What?" His tone was incredulous, laced with impatience. "Stop that and bring me the tea quickly. Can't you follow simple orders?" "But I started, only to be interrupted. "What a useless wife you are. Make me some sweet coffee, please." It was Mrs. Whitmore, my mother-in-law, speaking from the living room. She sat there, devouring a slice of cake she'd taken from the fridge, her eyes glinting with malice. I sighed, glancing at the mountain of dishes. "There are so many." "Leave them for later. Just do what we say, useless wife." Alex's voice was a whip, each word stinging. I was Alara, a 28-year-old working mother, trapped in a life that felt more like a prison than a home. Married at 23, I had hoped for love and companionship. Instead, I found myself in the clutches of Alex and his overbearing mother. Our son, only 4, was the sole source of joy in my bleak world. We lived in Alex's parents' house, a decision forced upon me under the guise of caring for Mrs. Whitmore after my father-in-law's passing. Initially, I sympathized with her supposed grief, but soon it became clear that I was nothing more than a pawn in her cruel game of domestic tyranny. Cooking, cleaning, working, it was never enough. My efforts were met with scorn, my meals left untouched or criticized harshly. "The stir-fry is so half-hearted," Mrs. Whitmore would scoff. "Cook it properly from scratch." "I'm busy and can only make simple things," I'd respond, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's why I hate backtalk from a daughter-in-law," she'd snap. "Cook from scratch. Why don't you cook then? You're a good cook, right?" I dared to retort once, immediately regretting it. "Why would I do housework when you're here?" Her response was cold, dismissive. "Are you out of your mind?" Their cruelty escalated over time, shifting from harsh words to a chilling silence. They began to ignore me completely, as if I were a ghost haunting my own home. My presence, once merely undervalued, now seemed entirely invisible. 5 years passed in this suffocating atmosphere. Alex and I turned 35 and 33, respectively. Our son grew, yet the oppressive air in the house remained unchanged. My mother-in-law, now 63, seemed to thrive on my misery. One evening, as I trudged home from work, a heavy realization settled over me. My existence seemed pointless in their eyes. I was a shadow, unseen and unheard. The only voice that acknowledged me was that of my son. The thought of losing even that small recognition was unbearable. Returning home, I began cooking immediately, trying to push away the gloom. I prepared mapo tofu, fried chicken, and a stir-fry with bell peppers and pork, hoping to bring some semblance of normalcy to our dinner. "Bring me the mayo," Alex commanded abruptly, breaking his long silence. "Sure, here you are," I replied, handing him the mayonnaise. His first words to me in ages were not of gratitude or conversation, but a mere order. It was the final straw, the breaking point of my patience and tolerance. The evening took a turn for the worse when Mrs. Whitmore demanded, "Clean the toilet." "What? Now?" I was aghast. "Yes, now," she insisted, her voice dripping with venom. I snapped back, unable to contain my frustration. "Don't say such a thing while we're eating. It's nasty." "Just like your heart," she hissed. Our argument escalated quickly, with Alex interjecting, demanding I apologize to his mother. But I refused, standing my ground for the first time in years. The conflict reached its peak, and in that moment, a decision crystallized within me. I needed to escape this toxic environment, not just for my sake, but for my son's as well. I retreated to my room, my resolve hardening. I downloaded divorce papers, filled them out, and slammed them in front of Alex. His shock was palpable, but I felt nothing but a cold determination. "I'm filing these," I declared, my voice steady. As I stood there facing my husband's bewildered expression, I realized I had finally stepped out of the shadows. It was time to reclaim my life. The days following my declaration of divorce were a whirlwind of cold glares and biting remarks. But amidst this storm, I found an unfamiliar sense of liberation. One evening, as I served dinner, Mrs. Whitmore looked at the meal with disdain. "You call this food? Even a child cooks better." I bit my tongue, focusing on my son's smiling face. "Eat up, sweetheart. I made your favorite tonight." Alex chimed in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, playing the perfect mother now, are we? What a joke." I could feel the anger bubbling inside me, but I kept my composure. "I'm just trying to make a nice dinner for our son." Mrs. Whitmore snorted. "Don't act high and mighty. You're just a burden in this house." The tension at the table was palpable. Alex's attempts to belittle me only intensified. "So, Alara, have you thought about how you'll survive after the divorce? You can barely keep a house, let alone your own life." I looked him straight in the eye. "I have been supporting this family for years. I'm not worried about taking care of myself and our son." His smirk faded slightly, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Mrs. Whitmore quickly intervened. "Don't be absurd. You need us more than we need you." The conversation turned to finances, a topic they usually avoided. "You do realize that without my salary, this household would crumble?" I stated, more to myself than to them. Mrs. Whitmore scoffed. "We'll manage. We don't need your pity money." But Alex's silence spoke volumes. He knew the truth. Without my income, they would be in dire straits. In the following days, their behavior became increasingly erratic. Mrs. Whitmore would oscillate between trying to sweet-talk me into staying and hurling insults when I didn't comply. Alex, on the other hand, seemed lost, his arrogant facade crumbling as the reality of his financial dependence became undeniable. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation between them that chilled me to the bone. "She can't leave us like this," Alex hissed. "We need her money." Mrs. Whitmore's reply was cold and calculated. "Don't worry. I have a plan. We'll make her life so miserable she won't dare to leave." Hearing their true intentions laid bare was a revelation. They didn't care about me or even our son. It was all about control and money. That night, as I lay in bed, a plan began to form in my mind. If they wanted a battle, I would give them one. But it wouldn't be fought with words or petty arguments. I would hit them where it hurt the most, their pride and their pockets. The next morning, I started putting my plan into action. I contacted a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who came highly recommended. "I want a divorce, and I want to make sure they don't get a penny more than they deserve," I told her. She nodded, her eyes glinting with determination. "We'll make sure of that. You've been the sole breadwinner, right? We'll use that." As the days passed, my resolve only grew stronger. I started documenting everything, the insults, the financial manipulation, even the smallest of grievances. It was time to turn the tables. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. And as I built my case, a sense of empowerment filled me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. The shadows of contempt were slowly lifting, and in their place, a new dawn was emerging. As the divorce proceedings began, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly toxic. Yet, with each passing day, my sense of fear diminished, replaced by a steely resolve. One evening, Mrs. Whitmore tried a different tactic. "Alara, dear, why don't we forget all this nasty business? You know we're family." Her words dripped with insincerity. I met her gaze, unwavering. "Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me." Alex, who had been quietly observing, scoffed. "Oh, playing the victim now? You're not as innocent as you pretend to be." I felt a surge of anger, but kept my voice calm. "I'm not playing anything, Alex. I'm just no longer willing to be your scapegoat." The conversation turned, as it often did, to finances. "You think you can just take our son and leave? How will you support him?" Alex challenged. I smiled, a small, confident curve of my lips. "I've been supporting this family for years. I think I can manage." Mrs. Whitmore's expression twisted into a sneer. "You're nothing without us. You'll come crawling back." But their words no longer held power over me. I knew my worth, and I knew the truth. The next day, I met with my lawyer again. She laid out the strategy clearly. We'll expose their financial dependency on you. It will play a crucial role in the custody battle and the division of assets. I nodded, feeling a sense of vindication. The law was on my side, and I was ready to fight. Back at home, the tension reached a boiling point. Mrs. Whitmore's attempts to undermine me became more desperate. "You think you're so smart," she spat one evening. "But you're just a cold-hearted woman, abandoning your family." I looked her straight in the eyes. "No, I'm a woman who's finally standing up for herself." Alex jumped in, his voice laced with venom. "You'll regret this. You can't survive without me." But his threats fell on deaf ears. I was done being intimidated. As the days went by, my preparations for the court battle intensified. I gathered financial statements, recorded their abusive remarks, and collected evidence of their negligence. One afternoon, as I was organizing my documents, my son came to me. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" His voice was small, uncertain. I pulled him into a hug, feeling a surge of protectiveness. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be just fine. We're leaving this place, and we're going to start a new, happy life. Just you and me." His arms tightened around me, and in that moment, I knew I was making the right decision. I was fighting, not just for myself, but for my son's future. The day of the court hearing loomed closer, and with it, a sense of impending freedom. I was ready to face Alex and Mrs. Whitmore, ready to end their reign of control and emotional abuse. I was ready to reclaim my life and give my son the peace and happiness he deserved. It was time for justice, and I was determined to see it served. The day of the court hearing arrived, a day I had been anticipating with a mix of dread and determination. As I sat across from Alex and Mrs. Whitmore in the courtroom, I felt a sense of surrealism. This was the moment where everything would change. The proceedings began with a cold formality. Alex's lawyer portrayed him as a devoted husband and father, struggling under the weight of false accusations. Mrs. Whitmore played the part of the grieving mother-in-law, wronged by an ungrateful daughter-in-law. But their performance was transparent, their lies brittle. When my turn came, I spoke clearly, my voice steady. "I have been the sole provider for this family for years. My husband's unemployment and his mother's manipulation have been constant sources of strain." Alex interjected, his voice laced with false hurt. "Alara, how can you say these things? I've always supported you." I turned to him, my gaze unwavering. "Support is more than just words, Alex. It's about actions, and your actions have shown nothing but selfishness and cruelty." The judge listened intently as I presented my evidence. Financial statements, recordings of their verbal abuse, testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed their behavior. The truth was undeniable. As the evidence mounted, Alex's facade began to crumble. Mrs. Whitmore's composure cracked, her mask of innocence slipping away. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. Then came the revelation that sealed their fate. My lawyer presented photographs and documents proving Alex's infidelity and Mrs. Whitmore's illicit affair with a wealthy neighbor, Mr. Harwood. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the images were displayed, showing them in compromising positions, their deception laid bare for all to see. Alex's face turned ashen, his eyes wide with shock. Mrs. Whitmore's expression twisted into one of fury, her hands trembling. You invaded our privacy!" Mrs. Whitmore shrieked, her voice shrill. I looked at her, my voice calm but firm. "No, I exposed the truth, a truth that you both have been hiding for too long." The judge called for order, but the damage was done. Their credibility was shattered, their lies exposed in the harsh light of the courtroom. As the hearing came to a close, the judge's verdict was clear. I was granted full custody of our son, and a fair division of assets was ordered. Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were left with little more than their shattered reputations. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The years of manipulation and emotional abuse were finally over. I had stood up to my oppressors and emerged victorious. But the sweetest moment came when my son ran into my arms outside the courthouse, his face bright with relief and happiness. "We did it, Mom," he said, his voice filled with joy. "Yes, we did," I replied, holding him close. "We're free now. It's just the beginning for us." And as we walked away, hand in hand, I knew that this was not just a victory for me. It was a victory for every person who had ever been made to feel small, powerless, or unworthy. It was a victory for truth and justice. It was the start of a new chapter, a chapter filled with hope and the promise of a brighter future. The aftermath of the court ruling was immediate and tumultuous. Word of Alex and Mrs. Whitmore's deceit spread like wildfire, tarnishing their reputations in our small community. They were no longer able to hide behind their facade of respectability. In the days following the verdict, I focused on rebuilding my life with my son, but I couldn't ignore the sense of satisfaction that came from knowing Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were facing the consequences of their actions. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Mr. Harwood's wife, Mrs. Harwood, her eyes red with unshed tears. "Alara, I heard about everything. I can't believe what Sylvia, Mrs. Whitmore, did." Her voice broke, and I could see the pain etched on her face. I invited her in, offering a cup of tea. As we sat at the kitchen table, she poured out her heartache. I trusted her as a neighbor, as a friend, and to think she was having an affair with my husband. I listened, offering words of comfort. It was clear that Mrs. Whitmore's actions had caused more damage than she had ever anticipated. The next day I encountered Alex in town. He was a shadow of the man he once was, his arrogance replaced by a look of defeat. "Alara, please, can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I stopped, facing him. "What is there to talk about, Alex?" He fidgeted, unable to meet my eyes. I'm sorry for everything. I didn't realize how much I depended on you, on your strength." His apology, though late, was a testament to the shift in power. He had lost everything, his dignity, his home, his family, and in that loss he had finally recognized his own faults. But it was Mrs. Whitmore who faced the harshest backlash. Her affair with Mr. Harwood had not only ruined her reputation, but had also led to legal troubles. Mrs. Harwood had filed for divorce and was pursuing a lawsuit against her for alienation of affection. I heard about Mrs. Whitmore's plight from neighbors, the whispers and rumors painting a picture of a woman undone by her own actions. She had become an outcast, shunned by those she had once considered friends. One afternoon, I saw her at the grocery store, her eyes downcast as she hurried through the aisles. Our paths crossed, and for a moment our eyes met. The look of resentment and defeat in her eyes was unmistakable. "You did this to me," she hissed under her breath as she passed by. I watched her go, feeling a mix of pity and vindication. "No, Sylvia, you did this to yourself," I whispered to myself. The tides of justice had turned, and the consequences of their actions were now inescapable. Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were living the life they had crafted through years of deceit and manipulation. And as I watched them struggle with the aftermath, I knew that the best revenge was living well, free from their toxic influence. As I turned my focus back to my son and our new life, I realized that this was not just a story of revenge. It was a story of liberation, of breaking free from the chains of abuse and control. And as I looked to the future, I knew that the best was yet to come. "You barely visit anymore. Marriage should be your priority, not this silly career," Lydia snapped, her cold eyes boring into me. Milo shifted uncomfortably beside me on the floral-patterned couch. "Mom, Elise works hard. You don't have to be so hard on her." Lydia waved her hand dismissively. "She needs to focus on her duties as a wife. When are you two going to start a family?" I clenched my jaw, fighting the anger bubbling inside me. This wasn't the first time Lydia had made digs about my job and criticized me as Milo's wife. But today, on our rare joint day off, it stung more than usual. "My career is important to me," I said evenly, proud of myself for not raising my voice. "And we've discussed children. We'll have them when the time is right for us." Lydia's eyes narrowed. "For you, you mean? For your convenience and schedule, typical modern woman always putting selfish desires first. That was it." "We should get going," I said flatly, standing up. Milo opened his mouth, then closed it again, standing as well. "Yes, run off. Par for the course these days," Lydia called after us. The drive back to our condo was silent. Milo kept glancing over at me, lips pursed, but I stared straight ahead, too angry to speak. How could he let his mother talk to me like that? When we got home, I went straight to the bedroom to be alone. A few minutes later, Milo poked his head in. "Else, are you okay?" I whirled around, my fury unleashed. "No, I'm not okay. Your mother constantly belittles me and my career, and you just sit there and take it. Do you agree with her outdated, misogynistic views?" He recoiled. What? No, of course not. She just has a certain way of speaking. She doesn't mean anything by it. I stared at him in disbelief. Doesn't mean anything by it? You can't be serious. She clearly thinks my job makes me a bad wife and that having a career means I'm selfish. She's just old-fashioned, Else. You know how she can be. He came over and put his hands on my shoulders. Don't let it bother you so much. I jerked away, unable to believe his nonchalance. My career was a huge part of who I was. How could he downplay his mother's words so easily? This has been building for years, I said, voice shaking slightly. She repeatedly criticizes and demeans me. I feel disrespected in my own marriage by my own husband. Milo's face fell. Els, I'm sorry. I never meant to make you feel that way. But it was too late for apologies. His flippant response to his mother's toxic behavior spoke volumes. I suddenly felt overwhelmingly alone. I can't keep living like this, I said quietly. We need to get counseling to work through these issues. If we can't get on the same page, I don't know if our marriage can survive. Milo paled, but I stood firm, my mind already spinning ahead to the next chapter of my life. The next morning, I was sifting through the mail when a letter from our bank caught my eye. Frowning, I opened it and froze. Our checking account was nearly empty. Milo, I called out, panic rising in my chest. Come here. He shuffled into the kitchen, still in his pajamas. What's up? Look at this, I said tersely, thrusting the bank statement at him. Our account is almost drained. What did you do? He scanned it and cringed. Ah, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Meaning to talk to me? We're supposed to be partners, Milo. How could you fritter away our savings without consulting me? I didn't fritter them away, he protested. I had some unexpected expenses come up. Like what? You better start explaining yourself right now. He shifted uncomfortably. Well, you know my parents haven't been in the best health lately. They needed some help with medical bills. They needed help? So instead of having an adult conversation with me, you just took money? It was an emergency. I couldn't let them get behind or wreck their credit rating. That's not an excuse, I said through gritted teeth. You went behind my back and used our marital assets. That's financial betrayal. I was going to tell you, Milo said, raising his hands. I just wanted to handle it first. That's no justification. You're a liar, Milo. I don't know if I can trust you anymore. His eyes widened. Else, come on, you're overreacting. It's not that big a deal. I stared at him incredulously. Not a big deal? He was more worried about his own guilty conscience than my feelings. We're supposed to be partners, I said, voice breaking. But you're disrespecting me and undermining our marriage with this garbage. I'm your wife, not your doormat. Milo rolled his eyes. There you go again, being overdramatic and emotional. It's not as serious as you're making it. That was it. I'd had enough of his dismissive, condescending attitude. I balled my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. You clearly don't value me, our marriage, or our finances, I spat. If you can't be an equal partner and show me basic respect, then I don't know what we're even doing here. Something flickered in Milo's eyes then. Was it shame? Hurt? I found I didn't care anymore. This callous financial betrayal was just one more blow after his mother's hurtful words. I was done being mistreated. I'm going to stay with Angela for a few days, I said, voice icy calm. Maybe some time apart will give you perspective. I stormed past him, grabbing my purse and keys. At the door, I turned back. I gave you my ultimatum yesterday. Get your act together, Milo. Seek counseling or be prepared to lose me. This behavior ends now. The door slammed behind me with a note of finality. As I drove away, tears blurring my vision, part of me already knew his answer. When I returned home from Angela's a few days later, Milo was waiting for me in the living room. He leapt up from the couch when I walked in. Els, thank God you're back. I've been so worried. He moved to hug me, but I stepped back, arms folded across my chest. I needed some space to think, I said flatly. Milo's face fell. I get it. I really screwed up with the money stuff. I'm so sorry. Sorry isn't good enough this time, Milo. Your actions have consequences. You're right, he said, nodding vigorously. I know I disrespected you, our marriage, everything. It won't happen again, I swear. That remains to be seen, I replied, unmoved. I've lost faith in a lot of your promises. Milo looked stricken. Els, please, tell me what I can do to fix this. I'll do anything. I took a deep breath. I want us to go to marriage counseling. Immediately, he paled. Counseling? Isn't that a bit extreme? No, it's not extreme, I exploded. We're at a breaking point here, Milo. I've put up with a lot, your mother's constant belittling, your betrayal of my trust regarding our finances. If you want to save our marriage, we need professional help to work through these issues. Milo gaped at me. Else, come on. Do we really need to drag some stranger into our business? I stared at him, dumbfounded by his resistance. Didn't he understand how serious this was? Yes, we really do need counseling, I said in a measured tone. It's that or risk losing me for good. I'm deadly serious about this. The hurt flashed across his face again. You're talking about divorce? I'm saying our marriage is on the line here. We've tried the easy way, the disrespect, the loss of trust. None of that has gotten through to you. So yes, if counseling doesn't work, then we may be headed towards divorce. That's just the cold, hard truth. Milo looked completely poleaxed. In that moment, I realized just how checked out he'd become, how little he valued or prioritized me in our relationship. The fact that divorce was shocking to him spoke volumes. I love you, Els, he said, voice catching. I don't want to lose you. For the first time in a long while, I saw sincerity in his eyes, but underneath was an undercurrent of fear. Fear of change, of sacrifice, of loss. Not love. Then we go to counseling. Period, I replied. Take it or leave it. I held his gaze, not backing down an inch. He finally nodded slowly. Okay, anything you want, I'll do it. But doubts swirled in my mind as I watched him turn away, head in his hands. His actions and choices going forward would determine everything. Meanwhile, part of me had already come to terms with where this might lead. A few weeks later, Milo and I were having breakfast when the doorbell rang. I frowned and went to answer it. On the doorstep stood Lydia and George, Milo's parents, suitcases in hand. Oh good, you're home, Lydia said, brushing past me into the condo. We're moving in for a while. I stood there, dumbfounded. Excuse me, moving in? George shuffled by as well, grunting a brief hello. Milo appeared behind me. Mom? Dad? What's going on here? We've had some health issues come up, Lydia explained, already unpacking her things. We can't stay in our place for the time being. For how long? And why didn't you give us any notice? This isn't okay, I said, trying to stay calm. Lydia barely glanced at me. Don't be so dramatic, Elise. It's only temporary, while we get our affairs in order. Right, Milo? She turned her cold gaze to her son. Milo looked cornered. Well, I knew they needed help, but I didn't know the full extent until this morning. You knew? I interrupted. And you didn't think to discuss this with me first? Milo held up his hands. I was going to bring it up. Mom just sprung it on me, too. Like hell you were, Lydia snapped. Stop lying to appease your wife. You knew we couldn't stay on our own. Thank goodness you married a woman with such a spacious home and income to support us. The way she said support us made my skin crawl. I turned to Milo, furious. Is this true? Were you planning this without consulting me? To my horror, he wouldn't meet my eyes. The realization washed over me. He and his mother had once again gone behind my back. You know we've been having health problems, George piped up gruffly from the hallway. Don't be so selfish and inflexible. Selfish? I exploded. Bringing house guests into our home without notice or consent is the height of disrespect. This is a boundary violation, Lydia tutted. Don't be so overdramatic, Elise. We're family. That's exactly the problem, I shot back. You don't treat me like family. You undermine and insult me constantly, and Milo just enables it. Milo still wouldn't look at me. He was paralyzed, torn between his wife and his toxic parents. Well, if this living situation is such a hardship for you, you know where the door is, Lydia said, words dripping with venom. Milo can make the decision that puts his family first. In that moment, I saw the truth with terrible clarity. Milo's ultimate loyalties still lay with his parents, no matter their behavior. My wishes, my boundaries meant nothing to them. Tears stung my eyes as I stared at my husband's cowardly, downcast face. It was over. I was done being disrespected and trampled on. Without another word, I turned and walked out the door, letting it slam behind me. I made it to my car before the sobs overcame me. Through the blur of tears, I knew I had been a fool. Milo's controlling mother had won. I had no choice left. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed the number for a divorce lawyer. Over the next couple of weeks, I moved out of the condo and into a studio apartment, attempting to rebuild my shattered life. I went through the motions at work, and tried to block out the pain and anger. My mind kept returning to Milo moving his parents in without my consent. It was a profound breach of trust, and there had to be more to it. He couldn't be that oblivious and controlled by his mother, could he? One night, I was going through some old files and came across our joint banking statements from the past year. Frowning, I pulled out a pen and paper and started tallying up some numbers. 2 hours later, I slumped back in my chair, staring at the totals in horror. It all made sense now. Milo had been funneling money from our accounts to his parents in secret for months. Thousands upon thousands of dollars frittered away under the guise of medical emergencies and essential expenses. I felt sick to my stomach. Not only had Milo violated my trust by moving his parents in, he had been systemically draining our finances to support them behind my back. It was a level of deception I couldn't have imagined. The next morning, I stormed up to Milo's office at the school, heart pounding. His face fell when he saw me. "Else, what's going on?" "This," I spat, shoving the accounting notes at him. "This is what's going on." Milo scanned the papers and visibly paled. "Oh, God! Oh, God is right!" I exploded. "How could you do this, secretly siphoning our money for over a year? Do you have any idea the level of betrayal here?" "Else, I was going to tell you. I swear, I just hated disappointing you." "This is so far beyond disappointment." I was shaking with rage. "You've been lying to me for months, using joint marital assets to fund your parents' lives. It's financial infidelity." Milo hung his head. "I know. It spiraled out of control before I could fix it." "Spiraled?" I laughed bitterly. "You made the choice to deceive me repeatedly. I just can't believe you'd stoop this low." "Please. You have to understand, they really did have emergencies and nowhere else to turn." "Don't give me that." I cut him off. "This is about your inability to set boundaries with your toxic, manipulative mother. Always has been." Milo looked up, shame and hurt warring on his face. I almost felt bad for a moment until I remembered he had brought this upon himself. "I can't be with someone who repeatedly violates my trust and boundaries," I said, my voice shaking. "Someone who values his parents' whims above his own wife's needs and well-being. It's over, Milo." The words hung in the air. Deep down, part of me realized I'd already made my choice. "Else, no, please." Milo reached for me, but I jerked away. "It's done," I said flatly. "I'll have my lawyer begin divorce proceedings." Milo let out a soft sob, but I refused to give in to sentiment. He had made his choices, and there were consequences. I turned and walked out, holding my head high. There was no more energy left for me to waste on him and his poisonous family. From here on out, I needed to focus on myself. As I got in my car, I took a deep, shuddering breath. A strange sense of calm came over me. I was free. A few weeks after I told Milo I was divorcing him, I received a frantic call from Angela. "Elise, you have to get over here right now. It's an emergency." My heart leapt into my throat. "What's going on? Are you okay? Just come quick. It's about Milo and his family. I'll explain when you arrive." I raced over to Angela's, cursing traffic the whole way. When I burst through her door, she was pacing anxiously. "Thank God you're here. Lydia and George showed up with all their crap, demanding to stay with me." "What?" I stared at her, aghast. "Why on earth would they come to you?" "They got kicked out of your place. Milo said he can't afford to keep supporting them anymore after the divorce expenses." I seethed, furious that Milo and his parents still felt entitled to bleed me dry. Of course they want to mooch off someone else. Typical. "I turned them away, obviously," Angela went on. "But Lydia started screaming and yelling, making all these wild accusations. She claimed you pushed Milo into divorce so you could take all his money and cut them off completely." My jaw dropped. "That's insane. She's delusional. I'm divorcing Milo because of his lies and disrespect, not money." I know," Angela soothed, "but she's spiraling, and I was worried she'd do something rash. So I told them to come here to hash it out with you directly." Just then, the doorbell rang. Angela gave me an apologetic look as Lydia's shrill voice came through the door. "Open up! We know the deceiver is here." I steeled myself and went to the door, Angela behind me. Flinging it open, I came face to face with Milo, Lydia, and George. Lydia's face was twisted in rage. "You wretched woman," she spat. "What have you done to my son?" "Mom, please," Milo hissed. But she brushed him off. "You've poisoned his mind and destroyed his life, you gold-digging witch. Now you're using divorce to steal from us. I recoiled at her vitriol, but forced myself to stand firm. That is categorically false. Your son was the one repeatedly lying and stealing from our marital assets to fund your lifestyle. I had no choice but to protect myself. Lies, she screamed. You manipulated and trapped him. He's penniless because of you. He's penniless because he drained our finances to give you money behind my back for over a year. I shot back. Your toxic control forced him to violate my boundaries repeatedly. Lydia laughed, a grating cackle. So you admit he valued us over you? As he should. You're nothing but a selfish harpy. That was it. I'd had enough of her venom. If what you say is true, if Milo truly valued you over me as his wife, then how pathetic is that? My words hung in the air. Milo looked stricken but stayed silent, cowed. George just grunted, arms folded. You're a cancer, Lydia, I went on, voice shaking with fury. And Milo let you infest and destroy our marriage so he could keep appeasing you. It's sick. I stared at my soon-to-be ex-husband, filled with a maelstrom of emotions. But underneath it all was pity. I'm divorcing a mama's boy too weak to stand up for himself or his wife, I said quietly. How sad for you both. Lydia's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I had deflated her bluster. Now get out, Angela interjected firmly. You're not welcome here. She closed the door in their stunned faces. I sank down onto a chair, emotionally drained. As the shouts started up outside, I realized I was finally, truly free. The toxic grip had been severed. It was time to reclaim my life. As I sat with Angela that day, watching Lydia and Milo through the window as they cursed and ranted, something shifted inside me. Their vitriol no longer had the same sting. I felt numb, detached. After they finally stormed off, Angela turned to me with a worried look. Are you okay? I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I took a deep breath and slowly let it out. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. Angela searched my face, confused. What do you mean? I mean I'm done letting them have power over me. That chapter of my life is closed. I thought for a moment. In fact, I'm not going to just passively end things with Milo. I'm taking control. Angela sat back, surprised. Taking control how? By getting justice. I stood up and began pacing, energy coursing through me. Milo systematically depleted our marital assets for over a year, giving that money to his vile parents behind my back. It was illegal and unethical on multiple levels. Angela nodded slowly, catching my meaning. So you're going to go after them, legally and financially? Absolutely. I'm consulting lawyers immediately to explore all my options. I have the evidence of his fraud and deception. He and his parents are going to face consequences. A grim smile crossed my face as a plan began to form. In fact, I may handle things a bit more creatively than just the legal angle. What are you thinking? Angela asked warily. Milo and Lydia have always dismissed me as some inconvenient, emotional modern woman who didn't know her proper submissive place, I explained. They underestimated me. I paused, picturing both their smug, sneering faces. I'm going to make them realize the full extent of exactly what kind of strong, capable woman I am. I'm going to utterly dismantle their world and status, just as they tried to do to me. Angela's eyebrows shot up. Damn, girl, you sound like a woman on a warpath. Damn right, I replied, eyes flashing. They messed with the wrong modern woman. Over the next few days, I immersed myself in research and planning. I met with a lawyer well-versed in financial crimes and divorce, laying out the full scope of Milo's betrayal with documentation. We began gathering additional evidence of the money trail, tracing the funds he had diverted to his parents over the past year. The lawyer assured me we had enough for criminal and civil charges of fraud, misappropriation of marital assets, and more. But I didn't stop there. I consulted a private investigator to dig deeper into Milo and Lydia's backgrounds and activities. I wanted to expose every shady financial dealing, every personal and reputational skeleton they tried so hard to hide. The investigator turned up a host of illicit activities from Lydia's past, tax evasion, unpaid debts galore, even a messy sex scandal that had been neatly swept under the rug. It confirmed my instinct that her holier-than-thou facade hid monstrous hypocrisy and moral failings. As the puzzle pieces came together, I began to set my plan in motion. There would be 3 stages. First, I would go scorched earth legally and financially, draining Milo and his parents of every last ill-gotten resource. Second, I would systematically expose and publicize Lydia's sordid history and criminal activities, completely dismantling her pedestal in the community. Finally, I would make an example of Milo to ensure full accountability. With each step planned out, I felt a sense of strength and purpose I hadn't experienced since my life with Milo unraveled. I was in control now. And as for sentiment, there was none left. It was time to repay them with the same ruthless selfishness they had shown me. Only then would justice be served. About 6 months after my fateful confrontation with Lydia and Milo, I was putting the final touches on my plan. It was time to strike. I sent out formal invitations to Milo, Lydia, George, and a handful of their closest friends and relatives, requesting their presence for a family gathering at my place. They would be expecting some sort of attempt at reconciliation. Little did they know. The appointed evening arrived, and my guests began filtering in, looking confused and annoyed. Lydia swept in last, chin high, glaring around imperiously. "Well, what is the meaning of this charade?" she demanded when she spotted me. I smiled thinly. "Please, everyone take a seat. I have an announcement to make." Mutterings filled the room as they grudgingly sat. Milo kept shooting me panicked looks, terrified of a scene, no doubt. Once they settled, I began to speak. "Friends, family, I've gathered you all here today to share some important news and set the record straight on a few matters." I paused, taking in their wary faces. Lydia was scowling. "Many of you know that my marriage has dissolved over the past year. What you may not realize is the scale and severity of the betrayal and damage done." I looked directly at Milo, who shrank under my gaze. "My husband systematically depleted our joint marital assets and finances over many months, funneling thousands upon thousands to support his parents' lifestyle and expenses without my knowledge or consent." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Lydia shot Milo a venomous look. "It was discovered," I went on, "that he fraudulently misused our funds out of an unwillingness to cut off his parents' constant demands for financial support. The extent of the deception is staggering." I shook my head slowly. The trust, respect, and sanctity of marriage was completely violated, and so decisive action had to be taken. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out a manila envelope. "As of today, I have officially filed both criminal fraud charges and a civil lawsuit against my former husband Milo. A portion of all future earnings and assets will be garnished to compensate for the damages." Milo's head snapped up, eyes wild. "You can't be serious!" But I pressed on. "Additionally, I have filed civil liability claims against both Lydia and George for their role in encouraging and facilitating this misconduct." My voice strengthened. "The bright lights of legal and financial ruin will now be shown in their faces. No stone will be left unturned. All misdeeds and shady dealings will be completely exposed." Lydia finally found her voice. "You lying snake! You can't do this. I won't allow it." I laughed coldly. "You have no power here anymore, Lydia. Your reign of abuse and manipulation is over." Reaching into my bag again, I pulled out a sheaf of documents. "In fact, let's go ahead and begin the exposure right now, shall we?" I started detailing Lydia's long history of criminal transgressions, tax evasion, insurance fraud, illegal offshore accounts, shady business dealings, even her little sex scandal that she thought stayed buried. Her face ashen, Lydia gaped at me as I mercilessly laid out the bitter, ugly truth. Around the room, shock and revulsion rippled through the guests, utterly dismantling the vain, holier-than-thou facade she had carefully constructed over the years, showing the world the real Lydia, a grasping, immoral hypocrite. She had no one to blame but herself. I finally fell silent. Lydia could only whimper denials through trembling lips. Looking around the room, I saw the dawning horror and disgust on every face, even Milo's. Her house of lies and illusions was crumbling. This was my revenge, my justice. They had underestimated me at every turn, and now the tables were turned. "You brought this upon yourselves," I said quietly. "You chose to make me your enemy, and you have no one to blame but yourselves." I stood in the kitchen, the aroma of brewed coffee hanging in the air, when Arthur's words sliced through the calm like a knife. "Evelyn, we've decided to live with Ethan and Lisa, so you need to leave." His voice, once warm and loving, now held a chilling finality. I blinked, disbelieving. The room spun slightly as I tried to comprehend his words. Lisa, standing beside him with arms crossed, chimed in with a sneer. "Yeah, it's about time. You've been nothing but a freeloader, Evelyn." A freeloader? Me? The absurdity of it stung. I had been the backbone of this family's finances for years, while Arthur played the role of the struggling artist, and now this? My gaze shifted from Arthur to Lisa, and then back to Arthur. He avoided my eyes, his face an emotionless mask. Anger and disbelief churned in my stomach. Is this some kind of sick joke? I asked, my voice shaking. No joke, Evelyn. We think it's best for everyone, Arthur said, his tone devoid of the warmth I once knew. The man I married, the man I built a life with, was now evicting me from my own home with the help of our son's wife. The absurdity of it all was overwhelming. I wanted to scream, to shout, to make them see the injustice. But all I could muster was a hollow laugh. You'll regret this, I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. Arthur's eyes finally met mine, but there was no remorse there, just a blank stare. Just pack your things and go, Evelyn. It's for the best. I looked around the kitchen, the heart of our home where I'd cooked countless meals, where we'd shared so many memories. And now they were casting me out like an unwanted guest. I'll leave, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. But remember this, Arthur, you'll regret this day. I turned, leaving them standing in the kitchen, and walked to our bedroom. My bedroom, the room where I had spent over 2 decades of my life, now just a hollow reminder of a love that had withered away. I packed a suitcase with clothes and essentials, grabbed my work laptop, bank book, and some valuables, and headed for the door. As I passed the living room, I saw them, sitting together, already erasing my existence from their lives. You think you've won, I said, pausing at the door, but this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Without waiting for a response, I walked out, the door closing behind me with a finality that echoed in my heart. As I drove to a nearby hotel, my mind raced with plans and possibilities. They thought they could discard me, but they were wrong. I was Evelyn Carter, and I would not go down without a fight. This betrayal would not go unpunished. I checked into the hotel and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The events of the day replayed in my mind, fueling a fire within me. They had unleashed something in me, something fierce and unyielding. I would rebuild my life, but not before making sure Arthur and Lisa understood the gravity of their mistake. They had underestimated me, and that was their biggest mistake. As I drifted into a restless sleep, one thought remained clear in my mind. This was not the end, but a new beginning. A beginning where I would take back control of my life and make them rue the day they crossed Evelyn Carter. The night at the hotel was restless, each tick of the clock a reminder of my shattered life. In the dim light of dawn, memories flooded in, bittersweet and sharp. I met Arthur when life was simpler, filled with dreams and possibilities. He was a graphic designer with a creative spark that ignited something in me. Our courtship was a whirlwind, a blend of passion and promise. We married young, and soon Ethan came along, completing our little family. But time has a way of eroding even the strongest foundations. Arthur's once passionate drive for his work dwindled into complacency. I continued working at a food manufacturing company, my career progressing steadily. It was my salary that kept us afloat, especially when Arthur decided to leave his stable job to pursue freelance work. Are you sure about this, Arthur? I had asked, concern lacing my words. He was confident, almost dismissive. I'll get work from my contacts. Plus, you're doing great with your job. My job, which he casually referred to as a side gig, was the lifeline of our finances. His ignorance of my professional worth was a growing wedge between us. It was during this time that Helen, Arthur's mother, became a central part of our lives. Her health was failing, and I found myself taking on the role of her caregiver. It seemed natural. She was family, after all. But Arthur's lack of involvement was a bitter pill to swallow. Why don't you help more with your mother? I once asked, frustration evident in my voice. Arthur just shrugged, his attention more on his designs than on my words. It was always about his work, his needs, never about Helen or me. As I lay in the hotel bed, the hurt from years of being undervalued and overlooked simmered within me. They had taken my kindness for weakness, my silence for submission. But no more. I would show them the strength of a woman scorned, a woman who had given her all only to be discarded. My plan began to take shape in the early morning light. It was time for Arthur and Lisa to face the consequences of their actions. They thought they had removed a problem from their lives, but in reality they had ignited a fire. I would start with Arthur's finances. It was time he learned the true value of the money I brought into our household. I knew his freelance work wasn't as lucrative as he pretended. His pride would crumble under the weight of financial realities. And Lisa, with her smug sense of entitlement, would learn that her actions had repercussions. I remembered her disdain, her condescending words. She had no idea about the struggles and sacrifices I had made for this family. I rose from the bed, a new determination coursing through me. I would not be a victim of their cruelty. I would be the architect of their comeuppance. As the sun rose, casting a warm glow through the window, I felt a sense of empowerment. Evelyn Carter was no longer just a name. It was a symbol of resilience and retribution. They had underestimated me, but they would soon learn the cost of their betrayal. This was not just about revenge. It was about justice. And I would have it, no matter what it took. The first rays of sunlight brought clarity and resolve. I checked out of the hotel with a single goal in mind, to begin my carefully crafted plan of retribution against Arthur and Lisa. Returning home to gather the rest of my belongings was a calculated move. I needed to see Arthur to gauge his reactions to feed the fire of my resolve. The house felt different as I stepped in, colder, unwelcoming. Arthur was in the living room, his back to me, lost in his thoughts. "I've come for the rest of my things," I announced, my voice steady. He turned, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before it settled into an indifferent mask. "Fine. Take whatever you need." As I moved through the house, memories taunted me, but I pushed them aside. This was no time for sentimentality. It was a time for action. In our bedroom, I quickly sorted through our shared life, compartmentalizing emotions, focusing on the task. Clothes, personal items, some documents. I was methodical, leaving no trace of myself behind. Arthur hovered at the doorway, watching. "Evelyn, are you sure about this?" His question was a mix of confusion and a faint hint of concern. It was almost laughable. "You made your choice, Arthur. Now live with it," I replied, without looking at him. I could feel his gaze on me, but I didn't falter. This was the man who had underestimated me, who had pushed me out of my own life. No more. The final item I packed was a photo of us in happier times. I stared at it, a bitter smile on my lips. Then, without a second thought, I left it on the dresser, a reminder of what he had lost. As I carried my belongings to the car, Arthur's voice stopped me. "Evelyn, about the finances." I turned, meeting his eyes. "What about them? We might need to discuss how we'll handle things moving forward." "Oh, now you're concerned about finances?" My voice was tinged with sarcasm. "Don't worry, Arthur. You'll manage. After all, I was just a side gig, remember?" His expression faltered, guilt and realization dawning. But it was too late for regrets. I drove away without looking back, the chapter of Arthur and me firmly closed. But this was just the beginning. My mind raced with plans, each more satisfying than the last. I knew Arthur's weaknesses, his pride, his finances, his superficial understanding of my contributions. I would use these to my advantage. He would learn the hard way the value of what he had so callously discarded. And Lisa, her arrogance, would be her downfall. I would make sure of it. She thought she could step into my life, take my place without consequence. She was sorely mistaken. I found a small apartment, a temporary refuge, as I plotted my next moves. It was modest but sufficient for my needs. As I unpacked, the reality of my situation sank in. I was alone, but I was also free. Free to rebuild, free to exact revenge, free to be the woman I was meant to be. That night, as I lay in bed in my new apartment, I felt a surge of empowerment. They had pushed me to the edge, but I had emerged stronger, more determined. Evelyn Carter would no longer be a victim. She would be a force to be reckoned with. Settled in my new apartment, I strategized my next moves. The first step was to confront the financial facade Arthur had constructed. It was time he faced the reality of our situation, the reality he so conveniently ignored. I started by securing my financial assets. I transferred my savings to a new account, ensuring Arthur had no access. This was my hard-earned money, and I would not let him squander it any longer. Next, I prepared for the inevitable legal battle. I contacted a lawyer, someone known for their tenacity and success in divorce cases. As I explained my situation, the lawyer nodded, understanding the gravity of my case. "We'll make sure you get what you deserve, Mrs. Carter," she assured me, her voice firm and confident. I felt a sense of relief, knowing I had a professional in my corner. This wasn't just about money, it was about justice. A few days later, I received a call from Arthur. His voice was strained, a hint of desperation creeping in. "Evelyn, we need to talk about the divorce and the finances." I agreed to meet, curious to see how he would handle this confrontation. We met at a quiet cafe, a neutral ground for what was to be a decisive discussion. Arthur looked worn, the stress of the situation clearly taking its toll. "Evelyn, I think we rushed into this. Maybe we can work things out?" His plea was pathetic, a stark contrast to the confident man I once knew. "Work things out? You threw me out, Arthur. You made your choice." He flinched at my words, but I felt no sympathy. This was the bed he had made. "We can't afford a divorce, Evelyn, not with my financial situation." "Oh, now you admit it," I retorted, my voice laced with scorn. "You're finally facing reality." Arthur's eyes darted around the cafe, his pride wounded. I thought we could come to an agreement, without lawyers." I leaned in, my gaze steady. "You want an agreement? Fine. I want $10,000. That's my price for an amicable divorce." Arthur's face paled. "10,000? I don't have that kind of money." "That's not my problem, Arthur. You wanted me out. You pay the price." He struggled for words, his facade crumbling. I'll see what I can do." I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "You have 1 week, Arthur. 1 week to give me what I'm owed." As I left the cafe, I could feel Arthur's eyes on me, but I didn't look back. This was more than just a financial transaction. It was a statement. I was no longer the woman he could manipulate and discard. Back in my apartment, I allowed myself a small smile. The tables were turning. Arthur was finally understanding the cost of his betrayal. And this was just the beginning. There was more to come, and I would make sure he paid every penny of the emotional debt he owed me. The week after confronting Arthur was a whirlwind of activity. I found solace in action, each step a move towards reclaiming my life. But the true test came when Arthur called to arrange the exchange of the $10,000. We met at the same cafe, a public space where emotions couldn't easily run amok. Arthur was there first, looking more defeated than ever. He handed me an envelope, his hand trembling slightly. "This is everything I could gather," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't count the money there. I didn't need to. The look in his eyes told me it was all there. "Consider this the end of our chapter, Arthur." As I turned to leave, I could feel his gaze heavy on my back. But I walked away without hesitation. This was more than a financial transaction. It was a reclaiming of my dignity. Back in my apartment, I counted the money. Each bill was a testament to my resilience, a down payment on my new life. But it wasn't the end of my plan. Not yet. The next step was Ethan and Lisa. Arthur's betrayal was one thing, but their complicity stung deeper. It was time they faced their own consequences. A few days later, the opportunity presented itself. Ethan called, his voice strained. "Mom, we need to talk. Can you come over?" I agreed, curious about what prompted his sudden request. At their house, the atmosphere was tense. Ethan fidgeted nervously, while Lisa's usual arrogance was replaced by unease. "What's this about, Ethan?" I asked, my tone neutral. "It's about Dad," Ethan began, his eyes avoiding mine. "He's in a bad place, financially. We might lose the house." Lisa chimed in, her voice laced with frustration. "And it's your fault with that ridiculous demand for money." My heart hardened at her words. "My fault? I was thrown out of my own home, Lisa. Did you expect me to just walk away without anything?" "But we're family," Ethan interjected, a note of desperation in his voice. "Family?" I scoffed. "Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me." Lisa's face reddened, her facade crumbling. "Well, what do you expect us to do now? You've taken everything." I stood, my resolve unshaken. "You expect sympathy from me? You made your choices. Now, live with them." As I left, I could hear them arguing, their voices a mix of blame and regret. But it was too late for apologies. They had shown their true colors, and now they were facing the consequences. In the solitude of my apartment, I reflected on the day's events. I had set out to reclaim my dignity, to make them understand the pain they had caused, and I had succeeded. But as I lay in bed that night, a sense of emptiness crept in. Revenge had brought satisfaction, yes, but it hadn't filled the void left by my shattered family. Yet I knew there was no going back. This was my path now, and I had to see it through to the end. As the days passed, my life settled into a new rhythm, one defined by independence and strength. Yet, the final act of my plan remained. It was time to expose Arthur and Lisa's true nature, to bring their deceit into the light. I began by digging into Arthur's financial affairs. It wasn't difficult. His desperation had made him careless. I discovered a trail of debt, poor investments, and most shockingly, evidence of an affair. It was the ammunition I needed. I confronted Arthur once more, this time at his office. It was a place where he felt in control, but I was about to shatter that illusion. "Arthur, we need to talk," I said, my voice calm yet assertive as I entered his office. He looked up, surprise etched on his face. "Evelyn, what are you doing here?" "I know about the affair, Arthur, and the debts," I stated, watching as his face drained of color. That's ridiculous," he stammered, but the guilt in his eyes betrayed him. "Don't insult my intelligence. I have proof," I countered, my words sharp. Arthur sank into his chair, the facade of confidence crumbling. "Evelyn, please, let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about. You've made your bed, now lie in it." My words were cold, a reflection of the void he had left in my heart. I left his office, leaving him to stew in his guilt and fear. But my plan wasn't complete. Lisa was next. I invited her for coffee, a public setting where she couldn't easily escape. When she arrived, her usual brashness was absent, replaced by caution. "Evelyn, what is this about?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "It's about you and Arthur," I said, meeting her gaze. "Your role in this whole mess." Lisa shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, but you do," I countered. "You encouraged Arthur's decisions, thinking it would benefit you. But now, you're just as responsible for the fallout." Lisa's facade cracked, her composure slipping. "You can't blame me for everything." "I can, and I do. You were part of this, Lisa. You can't escape that," I replied, my voice steady. Lisa looked away, unable to meet my gaze. She knew the truth, even if she couldn't admit it. As I left the cafe, I felt a sense of closure. I had exposed their deceit, their selfishness. They were left to face the consequences of their actions, just as I had faced mine. In the days that followed, the fallout from my revelations hit hard. Arthur's affair became public knowledge, his reputation tarnished. Lisa, caught in the crossfire, faced her own set of challenges. Her marriage with Ethan strained under the weight of the truth. I watched from a distance, my heart heavy yet vindicated. They had underestimated me, but I had shown them the strength of my resolve. Yet, in the quiet moments, I couldn't help but wonder if the price of revenge was too high. I had regained my dignity, but at what cost? The family I once loved was now broken, a casualty of the war I had waged. In the weeks following my confrontation with Arthur and Lisa, the repercussions of their actions, and mine, began to unfold in full view. The house that once echoed with our laughter now stood as a silent monument to broken dreams and betrayal. Arthur's career suffered greatly from the scandal. His clients left, unwilling to associate with a man whose personal life was in shambles. His financial troubles, once hidden behind a veil of pride, were now laid bare for all to see. Lisa, on the other hand, found herself isolated. Her marriage with Ethan strained to the breaking point, as the truth of her manipulation and greed surfaced. The social circles that once welcomed her now turned their backs, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Ethan had moved out, unable to cope with the continuous quarrels and the stark reality of their situation. Lisa, once so full of confidence and disdain, was now a shadow of her former self. And then there was Arthur. He called me one evening, his voice a mixture of sorrow and desperation. "Evelyn, I'm sorry. For everything." His apology, though late, was a testament to the depth of his downfall. "Your sorry can't undo what's been done, Arthur." I know I've made mistakes, but I'm paying for them now," he said, his voice breaking. "You're not the only one paying, Arthur. We all are," I replied, the weight of our collective pain heavy in my voice. We ended the call with no promises of reconciliation, only the somber acknowledgement of our shared history and its painful end. In the aftermath, I found solace in my newfound independence. The pain of the past was still there, a dull ache that ebbed and flowed with the days. But there was also a sense of freedom, a liberation from the chains of a loveless marriage and the suffocating deceit that had come with it. As I rebuilt my life piece by piece, I realized that revenge, though sweet, was also bittersweet. It had given me closure, yes, but at a cost. The family I had once cherished was now just a memory, a lesson learned in the hardest way possible. But life has a way of moving forward, and so did I. I found joy in small things, in the quiet moments of solitude, in the new beginnings that each day brought. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined me. I was Evelyn Carter, a woman who had faced her demons and emerged stronger. The journey had been long and fraught with pain, but I had survived, and in that survival I had found a new sense of self, a new purpose. As I look back now, I realize that the greatest revenge was not in the downfall of Arthur and Lisa, but in the rise of my own spirit. In the end, I had not just survived, I had thrived. "You really live like this every day?" Kira's words sliced through the silence, dripping with disdain as her eyes wandered around our modest living room. It was a seemingly innocent question, but it struck a nerve, a familiar chord that had been playing on repeat ever since my sister-in-law decided to grace us with her near-constant presence. "What do you mean?" I asked, unable to mask the sharpness in my tone. The refrain of Kira's disapproval had become a tiresome accompaniment to our otherwise quiet and fulfilling life. "Oh, you know," she waved a hand dismissively, "this whole minimalist thing you've got going on." Her lips curled into a smirk as she plopped down on our worn but comfortable sofa, making herself at home once again, uninvited. I opened my mouth to respond, but Eli cut me off with a gentle hand on my arm. "Kira, we like our home just the way it is," he said in a placating tone as if trying to soothe a wild animal. "It suits our needs perfectly." I bit back the retort that hovered on my tongue, swallowing the bitter words that would only escalate the situation. Eli meant well, but his refusal to confront Kira's entitled and invasive behavior only fueled my resentment. "If you say so," Kira shrugged, reaching for the remote control. "Hey, did you guys get that new cable package? I want to see if they have that home improvement show I was telling you about." Without waiting for a response, she flicked through the channels, her eyes glued to the screen, as if she owned the place. Meanwhile, Eli cast a helpless glance in my direction, silently pleading for me to maintain the peace. But this was our home, our sanctuary, a place where we had planned to welcome our first child into the world, and Kira's constant disruptions were slowly eroding the joy and anticipation that should have filled these moments. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in the storm brewing within me. Confrontation would only breed more chaos, and I couldn't afford to let Kira's negative energy taint the precious time I had left before our baby arrived. So I plastered a smile on my face and excused myself, retreating to the bedroom, where I could escape the suffocating weight of her presence. But as I closed the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that Kira's intrusions were just the beginning, and that far more turbulent times lay ahead. Kira's visits became increasingly frequent, coinciding with every significant milestone in my pregnancy. As my belly swelled with life, her presence seemed to suffocate the joy that should have surrounded this miraculous time. "Oh, good, you're here," Kira exclaimed one afternoon as she barged through the front door, her usual greeting devoid of any genuine warmth. I was worried I'd missed the big event. "Kira, what are you talking about?" I asked, confusion mingling with the all-too-familiar dread that knotted my stomach whenever she appeared unannounced. "The baby shower? Of course." She rolled her eyes as if I were being deliberately obtuse. "I assumed you'd be having one, you know, to celebrate and get all the essentials for the little bundle of joy." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "We're not having a baby shower. Eli and I decided we'd rather keep things low-key and intimate." "Low-key?" Kira scoffed, tossing her designer handbag onto the couch. "How utterly boring. You need to embrace the excitement, Mara. This is a momentous occasion, and you're acting like it's just another day at the office." Before I could respond, Eli emerged from the bedroom, his hair tousled from an afternoon nap. "Kira, what a nice surprise," he said, his voice tinged with a weariness that told me he found her visits just as draining as I did. "Eli, can you believe your wife isn't having a baby shower?" Kira demanded, rounding on him with her hands planted firmly on her hips. "It's like she's just going through the motions instead of celebrating this incredible journey." I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Eli beat me to it. Mara and I discussed it and were happy with our decision, he said, trying to placate his sister as he so often did. This is our first child, and we want to keep things simple. Kira scoffed again, her disdain palpable. Simple? You two have never done anything but live a simple life. It's no wonder you're so woefully unprepared. Her words stung, hitting a nerve that had been fraying for far too long. I turned to Eli, hoping he would finally take a stand and defend our choices, our lifestyle, me. But he simply shrugged, his eyes pleading with me to let it go. The bitter taste of disappointment coated my tongue as I swallowed my frustration. Once again, I found myself alone in navigating Kira's intrusive and entitled behavior, with Eli's passive acquiescence only enabling her further. As Kira prattled on about the lavish event she would have planned, had she been in charge, I felt a wall solidifying between Eli and me, a barrier constructed brick by brick, with each dismissal of my concerns and each failure to confront his sister's disrespect. And in that moment, I knew our quiet, fulfilling life would never be the same. Morning sickness had become a cruel companion, sapping my energy and leaving me nauseous and drained. As I lay curled up on the couch, trying to find solace in the quiet stillness of the house, the shrill sound of the doorbell shattered the fragile peace. "I'll get it," Eli called from the kitchen, his voice already tinged with resignation. I knew that tone. It meant only one thing. Kira had arrived unannounced yet again. "Mara?" Eli's voice rang out, confirming my suspicions. "Kira is here." I groaned inwardly, bracing myself for the impending tornado that was about to rip through our home. "Just tell her I'm not feeling well," I called back, hoping against hope that, for once, Kira might show a shred of consideration, but my plea was met with silence, followed by the unmistakable sound of Kira's voice, grating and intrusive as ever. "Mara, are you still wallowing on that couch?" she chided as she swept into the living room, her presence instantly suffocating. "You're not even trying to hide the fact that you're a miserable lump these days." I bit back the angry retort that rose in my throat, knowing it would only escalate the situation. Instead, I turned my face away, unable to bear the sight of her smug expression. "Kira, Mara isn't feeling well today," Eli tried to intervene, his voice wavering between exasperation and appeasement. "Maybe we can catch up another time?" But Kira waved off his suggestion with a flick of her perfectly manicured hand. "Nonsense. I'm here now, and I'm sure Mara could use the company." She dropped onto the couch beside me, her proximity suffocating. I fought the urge to recoil, my skin crawling with disgust at her utter disregard for my boundaries and well-being. "You know, I never had morning sickness like this when I was pregnant," Kira continued, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. "Then again, I actually took care of myself instead of lying around feeling sorry for myself all day." I snapped. "Kira, I'm not in the mood for your criticisms today," I spat, the words tumbling out in a rush. "If you can't be supportive, I'd rather you just leave." Silence hung in the air, thick with tension. Kira's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line of anger. "Well, I never." Mara's right, Eli's voice cut through the charged atmosphere, surprising us both. "She needs rest, Kira. I think it's best if you go." For a moment, I dared to hope that Eli had finally found his resolve, that he was standing up for me and our family. But then Kira's gaze shifted to him, her eyes narrowing even further. "Fine," she snapped, rising from the couch in a huff. "I'll go, but don't expect me to be so accommodating next time." Sure. With that, she spun on her heel and stormed out, leaving a tense silence in her wake. I turned to Eli, searching his face for a sign that this moment had truly been a turning point, that he was finally seeing Kira for who she was. But his expression was troubled, his eyes pleading with me to understand. And in that instant, I knew Eli had not chosen me over his sister. He had simply done the bare minimum to maintain the peace, as he always did. As disappointment and resignation washed over me, I realized that the true tipping point had not been Kira's behavior, but Eli's continued failure to defend me and our family. And in that moment, I knew that something had to change, before Kira's toxic presence destroyed us all. The voicemail from Kira was the final straw. Her shrill voice, dripping with disdain, announced yet another unannounced visit, as if our home were her personal playground and our boundaries mere suggestions to be ignored. I stared at my phone, anger and resentment burning through me like wildfire. I had endured Kira's intrusions, her blatant disrespect, and her toxic presence for far too long. And Eli's failure to stand up for me, to protect our family, had only emboldened her entitled behavior. Enough was enough. I sprang into action, moving through the house with a newfound determination. I emptied the pantry, the cabinets, the refrigerator, stripping them bare until only the barest essentials remained. Kira wanted to treat our home like her personal domain. Fine, let her experience the true consequences of her actions. As I worked, my mind raced with the knowledge that I couldn't stay here, couldn't continue to subject myself to this constant onslaught of disrespect and disregard. I needed space, a sanctuary away from Kira's toxic presence, a place where I could breathe, regroup, and strategize my next move. I quickly packed a bag, grabbing only the essentials. There was no time to dwell on sentiment or attachment. This was survival, a desperate bid to preserve my sanity and protect the well-being of my unborn child. Just as I was about to leave, Eli walked through the door, his brow furrowed in confusion as he took in the empty kitchen and my packed bag. "Mara, what's going on?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. I met his gaze, my resolve unwavering. "I'm going to stay with my parents for a while," I said, the words falling from my lips with a finality that left no room for argument. Eli's eyes widened. "What? Why? What happened?" I shook my head, disappointment burning hot in my chest. "You don't see it, do you? You refuse to acknowledge the damage Kira is causing, the way she tramples over our boundaries and disrespects me at every turn. Well, I'm done. I can't keep subjecting myself to this toxic environment." Eli opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "Don't try to talk me out of this," I said, my voice trembling with the weight of my emotions. "I need space, Eli. I need to get away from Kira's constant presence and your refusal to stand up to her. Until you can see the truth and make real changes, I can't be here." With that, I shouldered my bag and pushed past him, my heart heavy with the knowledge that our relationship hung in the balance. But as I stepped out into the crisp evening air, I felt a glimmer of hope. A sense that, by taking this drastic step, I might finally be able to reclaim my power, my dignity, and my life. And if Kira thought her intrusions had been disruptive before, she had no idea what was in store. The game had changed, and I was no longer playing by her rules. As the familiar sights of my childhood hometown rolled past the car window, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This is what I needed, a sanctuary away from Kira's toxic presence, a place to regroup and regain my strength. "Mara, honey, are you sure about this?" My mother's gentle voice broke the silence, her eyes filled with concern. I took a deep breath, steeling my resolve. "Yes, Mom. I can't keep living like this. Kira's behavior has become unbearable, and Eli refuses to stand up to her. I need space to think, to figure out my next move." My father's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. "That sister of his has always been a piece of work," he grumbled. "I never understood why Eli couldn't see her for who she really is." "It's like she has him under some kind of spell," I sighed. "No matter how much she disrespects me or tramples our boundaries, he just lets it happen, as if keeping the peace with her is more important than protecting his own family." The disappointment in my voice was palpable, and my mother reached across the console to give my hand a comforting squeeze. "Well, you did the right thing by getting away," she said firmly. "Let Eli deal with the consequences of his sister's behavior for a change. Maybe then he'll finally see the light." As we pulled up to my parents' cozy bungalow, a small flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe this was exactly what Eli needed, a wake-up call, a taste of the chaos and strain that Kira had inflicted upon our lives for far too long. Without me there to act as a buffer, to absorb the brunt of her demands and disrespect, Eli would be forced to confront the full weight of Kira's entitled nature. And perhaps, just perhaps, that experience would finally open his eyes. "Come on, let's get you settled," my dad said, breaking me from my thoughts. "We've got your old room all ready for you." As I stepped into the house, the familiar scents and sounds enveloped me like a warm embrace. This is what I needed, a safe haven, a place to gather my strength and formulate a plan. Because I couldn't stay away forever. Sooner or later, I would have to return and face the consequences of my actions. But when I did, I would be ready, ready to draw a line in the sand, to demand the respect and boundaries that Kira had so blatantly disregarded. And this time, I wouldn't be alone. Eli would have no choice but to see the truth, to acknowledge the damage his sister had wrought upon our family. And if he refused to make the necessary changes, to stand by my side and protect our little family, then I would have to make a choice, one that I had never imagined possible. But for now, I pushed those weighty thoughts aside, allowing myself to bask in the warmth and security of my childhood home. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight I would rest, fortifying myself for the battles that lay ahead. The shrill ringing of the doorbell pierced the silence, shattering the fragile peace that had settled over the house since Mara's departure. With a weary sigh, Eli dragged himself from the couch and trudged to the door, knowing exactly who he would find on the other side. Kira, he greeted his sister with a forced smile, already bracing himself for the impending storm. "Finally!" she huffed, pushing past him without invitation. "I've been ringing the doorbell for ages. What took you so long?" Eli bit back a retort, reminding himself that confrontation would only escalate the situation. "I was in the other room," he said, trying to keep his tone even. "Well, next time, try to be a bit more attentive," Kira chided, dropping her purse onto the couch with a loud thump. "Where's Mara? I need to discuss the arrangements for my next visit." Eli's gut twisted at the mention of his wife's name. "Mara's not here," he said quietly. "She's staying with her parents for a while." Kira's perfectly sculpted brows shot up in surprise. "What? Why on earth would she do that?" Eli swallowed hard, the weight of his failure pressing down upon him like a physical burden. "She needed some space," he admitted, unable to meet his sister's piercing gaze. "Space?" Kira scoffed. "From what? Her perfect little life? She's just being dramatic as usual." Eli clenched his jaw, her words reigniting the embers of resentment that had been smoldering within him since Mara's departure. "She needed space from you, Kira," he blurted out, the truth tumbling from his lips before he could stop it. Silence hung in the air, thick with tension. Kira's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line of anger. "Excuse me?" Eli took a deep breath, steeling his resolve. "Mara couldn't handle your constant intrusions anymore. Your disrespect for her boundaries, your complete lack of consideration, it became too much." Kira's face flushed with indignation. "How dare you speak to me like that? I'm family, Eli. I have every right to be here, to be involved in your lives." Eli shook his head, anger and frustration bubbling up within him. "No, Kira, you don't. Not when you treat our home like your personal playground, not when you trample over Mara's wishes and make her feel disrespected in her own house." Kira opened her mouth to protest, but Eli held up a hand, silencing her. "You've been nothing but a hindrance, Kira, a constant source of stress and chaos, and I've been too blind to see it." As the words tumbled out, Eli felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, a burden he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. Confronting Kira, standing up to her entitled behavior, it was long overdue. "Well, if that's how you feel, then maybe I won't come around as often," Kira snapped, grabbing her purse and storming towards the door. Eli watched her go, a strange sense of relief washing over him. For the first time in a long time, he felt as though he could breathe, as though the suffocating weight of Kira's presence had finally been lifted. But as the silence settled over the house once more, a new realization began to dawn on him. Mara had been right all along. She had seen the truth, had tried to make him understand the damage Kira was causing. And he had failed her, time and time again, choosing to maintain the peace rather than protect his own family. As the full weight of his negligence crashed over him, Eli felt a surge of determination. He couldn't undo the past, but he could make amends. He could prove to Mara that he was finally ready to stand by her side, to fight for their family and the life they deserved. With renewed purpose, Eli began to assess the chaos that Kira had left in her wake. The empty fridge, the cluttered living room, the trail of demands and complaints, it was a harsh reality check, a glimpse into the daily struggles that Mara had endured for far too long. As he worked to restore order to their home, Eli's resolve grew stronger with each passing minute. He would not fail Mara again. He would show her, through his actions and his unwavering support, that he was ready to be the partner she deserved. And when she finally returned, He would make things right, no matter what it took. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway jolted me from my thoughts. I peered through the living room window, my heart leaping into my throat as I recognized my parents' familiar sedan. The moment of truth had arrived. I steeled myself, taking a deep breath as the front door swung open. Mara stepped inside, her eyes immediately finding mine. For a moment, we simply stared at one another, the weight of all that had transpired hanging heavy in the air. "Mara," I began, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry." She blinked, surprise flickering across her features. "Sorry? For what exactly?" I ran a hand through my hair, struggling to find the right words. "For everything. For not seeing the truth. For not standing up to Kira and protecting you. Protecting our family." Mara's expression hardened, her jaw clenching. "It's a little late for apologies, Eli. I begged you to intervene, to put an end to Kira's disrespect and entitlement. But you just let it happen, over and over again." Her words stung, but I knew I deserved them. "You're right. I was blind and I failed you in the worst way. But I promise you, Mara, my eyes are open now. I finally see the damage Kira was causing, the stress and chaos she inflicted upon us." "Oh, really?" Mara's voice dripped with skepticism. "And what exactly opened your eyes?" I took a deep breath, knowing that the truth would be difficult to hear. "After you left, Kira came over, as belligerent and entitled as ever. She couldn't understand why you needed space, why you felt the need to get away from her constant intrusions." Mara's eyes widened, and I pressed on, determined to lay everything bare. I couldn't hold back any longer. I confronted her, told her the truth about how she had trampled over your boundaries and made you feel disrespected in your own home. "You stood up to Kira?" Mara's voice was laced with disbelief. I nodded, a sense of shame washing over me. "I know. I should have done it sooner, but better late than never, right?" Mara shook her head slowly, her expression unreadable. "And what did Kira say? How did she react?" I grimaced at the memory. "She was furious, of course. Couldn't handle the truth. She stormed out, said she wouldn't be coming around as much." Mara's lips curved into a humorless smile. "So she threw a tantrum and left, as usual, and you think that's enough? That standing up to her once, after years of enabling her behavior, is going to make everything better?" Her words stung, but I knew she was right. "No, of course not. I know I have a lot of work to do, a lot of trust to rebuild, but I'm ready, Mara. I'm ready to be the partner you deserve, to fight for our family and put you first." Silence hung in the air, thick with tension. Mara's gaze searched mine, her eyes glimmering with a mixture of hope and wariness. "I want to believe you, Eli, I really do, but words aren't enough anymore. You have to prove it to me through your actions and your unwavering support." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "I know, and I will, Mara. I promise you, I will do whatever it takes to make things right between us." Mara's expression softened, just a fraction. "We'll see," she said, her voice laced with a cautious optimism. "But for now, I think it's best if I stay with my parents for a little while longer." It wasn't the outcome I had hoped for, but I knew I had no one to blame but myself. I had allowed this rift to form, had failed to protect my wife and our family. And now I would have to work twice as hard to bridge that divide, to prove that I was ready to be the partner she deserved. As Mara turned and headed back towards her parents' car, I watched her go, a newfound determination burning within me. This was my chance to make things right, to show her that I had truly learned from my mistakes, and I would not squander it. Not this time. The moving truck rumbled down the quiet street, its presence a stark contrast to the tranquil neighborhood. As it pulled up to our new home, a sense of excitement and trepidation washed over me. This was it, the fresh start we had both been craving. "You ready?" Eli asked, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. I took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "As I'll ever be." We had been through so much, our relationship hanging by a thread after Kira's relentless intrusions. But Eli had proven himself, time and time again, standing firm against his sister's entitled demands and prioritizing our family above all else. It hadn't been easy. There were still moments of doubt, flashes of resentment that threatened to reignite the flames of our past conflicts. But we had worked through them, our communication stronger than ever. And now, as we prepared to embark on this new chapter, I couldn't help but feel a sense of optimism. The movers began unloading our belongings, and Eli and I set to work directing them through the unfamiliar rooms. As we bustled about, a familiar figure appeared on the sidewalk, her stilettos clicking against the pavement. Well, what do we have here? Kira's voice rang out, as grating as ever. I tensed, bracing myself for another confrontation. But before I could respond, Eli stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. Kira, what are you doing here? He demanded, his tone brooking no argument. She scoffed, tossing her perfectly coiffed hair over her shoulder. What do you mean? What am I doing here? I'm family, remember? I have every right to know what's going on in your lives. Eli shook his head, his stance unwavering. Not anymore, Kira. We've moved, and we're not giving you the new address. Kira's eyes widened in disbelief. What? You can't be serious. I am, Eli said firmly. We're drawing a line, Kira. After everything you put Mara through, the constant disrespect and entitlement, we're not letting you back into our lives. Kira's face flushed with anger, her perfectly sculpted features contorting into a mask of fury. How dare you? After everything I've done for you, you're just going to cut me out like this? You did this to yourself, Kira, I chimed in, my voice steady and resolute. We gave you chance after chance to treat us with respect, to honor our boundaries, but you refused, time and time again, and now you have to face the consequences. Kira's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. Fine, she spat. If that's how you want to play it, then good riddance. You'll be sorry when you realize how much you need me. With that, she spun on her heel and stalked away, her heels striking the pavement with an angry rhythm. As we watched her retreating figure, a sense of relief washed over me. We had finally reclaimed our power, our dignity, our lives. Eli pulled me into a tight embrace, his touch warm and comforting. We did it, he murmured into my hair. We stood our ground, and we won. I nodded, allowing myself to sink into his embrace. We did, and now we can start fresh, on our own terms. As we turned back towards our new home, a weight seemed to lift from my shoulders. The future stretched out before us, full of promise and possibility, and for the first time in a long time, I knew that Kira's toxic presence would no longer cast a shadow over our lives. We were free to build the future we deserved, the life we had always dreamed of. And as we stepped over the threshold, hand in hand, I knew that this was just the beginning of our journey.